This video is a compilation of all my MMO role-playing videos on this channel thus far. It's sorted for your convenience with timestamps down in the description so you can get started right away if there's a section you're interested in. It's sorted into two halves. The first half is the player's handbook. The second half is the MMO event creator's handbook. For example, if you're a dungeon master or you're starting a guild or you're getting a dice system together, or you just want to run some fun adventures with your friends, there's some videos there about how to lead them. So it's all in one, compiled with minimal editing, just to kind of cut out the end of it where I would say, well, that's the end of this video, so that's cut out. If you like what you're saying, please let me know. Like or dislike the video, comment, subscribe. If you disappear like a ghost, I'm not going to know whether you want more of this or not, so let me know if you do. MMO roleplay can be very dull. A lot of times you're just sitting there typing to somebody, and then you wait 5 minutes for them to reply back to you, so... this is a good video to have on in the background while you're role-playing, and then when you're done watching this video, I have a Minecraft no commentary playlist you can put in the background. That's every episode is a minimum of 3 hours, and you can just leave in the background, let it play, listen to the sounds, occasionally glance over and watch me farming, caving, and sometimes dying. So what more can you ask from a YouTuber, right? Anyways, I hope you enjoy. Here's the entirety of MMO Roleplay Compendium. Hi. I'm Gretch. I'm a Dungeon Master for 5th Edition D&D. I've also been a host for many role-playing events in MMORPGs. This video is meant to kind of explain what role-playing is because you're probably interested in getting into it. Role-playing's become absolutely huge these days as D&D has reached critical mass far beyond what it ever was before, many times thanks to Critical Role and the various systems there and communities on Reddit and on TikTok. And of course, COVID helped with a lot of that, getting people interested in an immersive experience. So without further explanation, let's get into what you're here for. So what is roleplay? Well, roleplay is when you assume the role of the character and then play that out. It's a step beyond your character creator in whatever MMORPG you're playing. And for the sake of this video, I'm going to be using Final Fantasy XIV for illustrations and examples. One of the questions you want to ask yourself is, why do you choose a race other than human if there's no difference in stats? Why do you sometimes choose a gender other than your own if there's no difference in stats? And that's actually extremely common, by the way. You do it because you like the idea of playing a character. Be it a Y sorcerer or a metal Goliath. You kind of like the idea of something different and kind of taking on the role of or an image of something you like that looks really cool, acts cool. And so your role playing is a step beyond the character creator. You're going a step further in, you know. And don't get ahead of yourselves. MMORPGs are nerdy as hell as is. Role-playing is just an extra level of nerd. I know a lot of people like to... It used to be a popular thing years ago to try to look cool by insulting role-players, but look, MMORPGs are nerdy as hell already. You know, with your gear score, your spreadsheets, your countless guides, running the same raid over and over to get a little piece of gear that's going to make your number go higher than the other guy next to you. It's nerdy as hell. So when you go into role-playing, what you're doing is you're taking your immersion in the game to a new level alongside other people, like-minded people who want to have fun. MMO role-playing is often misinterpreted by streamers. This is very common and one of the reasons why I'm kind of making this video. Streamers and YouTubers are often trying to provide content that's entertaining to the people watching them, and so they tend to do things which may not necessarily represent what role-playing is like. They're not really on the inside there. They just kind of, for example, very common to see streamers go to Goldshire and Moonguard in World of Warcraft. They kind of say, well, let's take a look at what all the role players are doing. They're not role playing, they're shit posting and goofing off. That's what they're doing. Many streamers, it's becoming a popular thing with streamers to show their roleplay club that they decorated to get all their, the community playing there with them. But role playing is not just standing in the roleplay club doing bee's knees for an hour. Though RP can and does happen in those places. If you see a skimpily dressed cat girl doing push-ups on another person, that's not role-playing. And that's not ERP either. I can talk about some of that stuff in a different video because I know it's a hot-button topic. Erotic role-play is absolutely massive, but I'll talk about that in a future video. But role-playing is actually more akin to writing. That's what it really is. So what it is many times the things your character says and the things they act out in emotes, custom emotes. You know, pointing and beckoning and that kind of stuff, waving. Those are very common emotes. Sometimes you don't have to be a role player. They kind of dink around, bow at somebody, give somebody a wave, do the slap animation. That's just having fun. but custom emoting is where the writing comes in. You see, in tabletop role-playing, the way you communicate and role-play your character is through acting and speech. Or if you're online through like a voice channel on Discord, it's through speech. Well, in MMORPGs, it's typically done through text because that's your primary way of communicating in-game. Sometimes the community may have a voice channel for role-playing if they want to do it that way, but most of the time you're using the tools available in the game to role-play in the game, which tends to interpret to text. So typing things out, writing things out, that's a very common way in which they communicate. And in addition to that, unlike tabletop role-playing, it also helps form a greater disconnect between the player and between the character, and that's actually very important when it comes to roleplay. It's something very beneficial that only this kind of roleplay format has versus tabletop. Whereas tabletop role-playing is more akin to people having a conversation for interacting with their characters and the dungeon master, in MMORPGs, it's more akin to multiple people writing a story together. So writing is very much key to role-playing. And finally, role-playing is unlimited content. When you're done with the main story, when you've run the raid 20 million times, there's always role-playing because role-playing never ends. And there's a disconnect between the character you play on the game and the character you role-play on. And that's kind of the thing, is you don't have to be a dragoon because your character is a dragoon. You don't have to be necessarily those things. When you're role-playing inside a role-playing environment with other role-players, you're not the warrior of light. And you don't want people to be the warrior of light. You can be anything you want that's in that game world. That's part of what makes it immersive and fun. You can be a merchant, a pauper, a sailor, a pirate, a mercenary, a spy, a hunter in the wood with just his bow and his pets. You know, a lancer that protects the wildwood, the police force of a city, soldiers, Ishgardian dragoons, if you want to be. If you want to, you can be an adventurer or just a traveler, a poet, a singer, a librarian. I have a character that's a pop star. I have another character that's an engineer. And I'm not an engineer in real life. I don't know anything about mechanical engineering. And yet I can still have fun with engineering roleplay. After all, we got the steelworks in Ishgard, right? You use that creativity to go into that immersive environment to where it's unlimited content. Very much like PvP in this sense. Why do people still play poker for decades and decades? Because it's PvP. It's always different each time you play it. Why is it that the most popular games played on Twitch today are all multiplayer PvP for the vast majority of all of them? Because it's always different each time you play PvP. Same reason we all watch sports. It's the same game, it's always different. So it's unlimited content, and in much the same way, role-playing is unlimited content. Each time you engage with someone, it's a different experience. Each time you go to another story, it's a different experience. Each time you go to a different event where the focus can be this thing or that, it's always a different experience. It's never the same thing twice, and you can just keep going forever with it. What are some of the differences between tabletop RPGs and MMORPGs? Well, to start it off, tabletop RPGs tend to be more short form. They tend to be things that you do sporadically throughout, maybe once a week or just sporadically throughout the month. Your relationship with that character tends to be on and off for those times in which you're role-playing. Whereas in MMORPGs, it tends to be very much more long form. Tabletop RPGs tend to be more rules heavy. There's lots of different rules books for D&D, aren't there? And replace D&D with any other system of your choosing when I talk about tabletop. Whereas in MMORPGs, you may have a lot of those things, but they typically are rules light. Reason being, whatever community you have in game pales in comparison to the prevalency of 5th edition D&D, right? So you want to have stuff that's easy for people to comprehend and understand so they can get in and have fun and playing with others. It's good to have rules, but you don't want to go overboard with it because no one's going to read 20 books worth of documentation before they start playing with you. Tabletop communities are typically small groups. They tend to be a number of players between 4 or 5 or 6. That's on the normal side for D&D and stuff like that. Whereas in MMORPGs, you typically have events with many more people than that, and you have potentially massive groups, which is a lot to handle. It's a lot to handle, and that kind of goes into what I'm talking about with rules light. Because you typically have a lot more people at your events in MMORPGs, you want to go more rules light so you're not wading in the deep end of the pool when it comes time to managing everyone mechanically. Tabletop roleplay is often more sporadically available, whether you do it throughout the week, every couple weeks, whereas MMORPGs, what's unique to them is that it's always on. And this kind of lends itself to the long form I spoke about earlier. MMORPGs are always on, and the role-playing is always on. You can always find people to role-play. In Final Fantasy, you just head to Ul'dah, and you can go not just in the quicksands, you can go there, and some people go there for certain type of roleplay, and real roleplaying is done there too, you know. But I mean, you can also go to the alleys around the streets. I've been in random, you know, spur of the moment events that people have started. It's always on and always available. You can jump in and play the same character all day long. So what are some of the differences when it comes to like the Dungeon Master? Well, the Dungeon Master in tabletop role-playing games is often necessary there, unless excluding some rare systems where you don't really need one. But the Dungeon Master is necessary for the game to even take place in tabletop. Whereas in MMORPGs, they don't necessarily need to be there. Now in communities where guilds have progressive events or events that are hosted by people, yeah, your Dungeon Master is essentially that person there. And of course, replace Dungeon Master with Game Master for whatever your preference is. I'm from 5th edition, so I love the term Dungeon Master. But many times your Dungeon Master is absent, especially if we're talking about open and walk-up social roleplay. You know, you go down to the tavern to hang out with some other players. There's no Dungeon Master there. The Dungeon Master in tabletop manages the game. Whereas in MMORPGs, typically you have a guild leadership which manages the game. Solo arbitration. The Dungeon Master in tabletop is the solo arbitrator. They decide the rules. They call the shots as far as if this is balanced. Whereas in MMORPGs, typically it's a council that arbitrates. You usually have the guild master, vice guild master, any other trusted players that have been there, and any other trusted players that kind of arbitrate and make decisions on as far as rules, community conflicts, and stuff like that. Finally, the Dungeon Master is the game host in tabletop, whereas the Dungeon Master in MMORPGs can many times be the event host. In fact, because of that, in many role-playing guilds, you will have your guild leadership being your Dungeon Masters, your event hosts. But also, in many progressive and heavy role-playing guilds, you will have many event hosts. And they're hosting their own time, their own event, and their own stuff that they're managing as the Dungeon Master for that time. They're the event host. And finally, I'd like to talk about common roleplay community types in MMORPGs. Most common that you probably are used to seeing is open roleplay. This is known as your walk-up, your taverns, your cities. This is your always-on roleplay to where you don't have to be part of a guild. In fact, many role players are not part of any roleplay guild. This is what people very commonly see, the person walking through the city. Next common type is your social side of roleplaying. These tend to be more of your themes. This is going to be things like nightclubs, like running restaurants and owning a bar and stuff like that, where usually you have some kind of management involved with restaurants. Then you have progressive communities. Progressive communities is where you're going to find your adventuring. You're going to have things that involve attributes such as strength, stamina, dexterity. You're typically going to have dice rolling to keep things balanced and keep things chaotic so that you don't have to fight with the dice, but many times you're going to see people whiffing everything and perfectly dodging them or trying to god mode others. Dice keep things balanced. They keep things on an even playing field, introduce a bit of random and curiosity to the mix. You tend to have loot in these guilds, you know, through events and whatnot. You tend to gather a nice bit of loot, and some people really like the idea of building out a character sheet and fleshing it out with all the cool different skills and things that they've earned. You know, because all that stuff becomes part of a story you can tell to your friends. And then, of course, you have levels, or you can do either flat leveling or just promotion within the guild, a sense of progression, whereas you attend events, and the more you attend, the higher you get promoted and whatnot. And finally, and very common to progressive, are your heavy or hardcore role-playing guilds. Why are they hardcore? Because they're super dedicated. They have a heavy schedule. They tend to be multiple events throughout the day at many different times. It's not uncommon to see various role-play events throughout the day, most of which are 1 hour, sometimes 2 hours, and they're slotted according to a, you know, whatever time zone the guild is using on a schedule, like a Google Calendar, and they all have to be coordinated at the start of every week. And what that does is that allows people opportunity to host their own events without conflict. And you tend to have multiple hosts in these guilds as well because there's so many things happen. When you get to this point of a hardcore role-playing guild, you tend to have large guilds. This is not just a small group of friends at this point. And you have to kind of resolve those conflicts with time. Some events are big, massive story events. Others may be crafting. Others may be training. We'll talk about all that stuff. I hope this video was helpful. I'm going to be putting out a couple more videos on this subject to kind of talk about, you know, creating your own character and role-playing it, creating a role-play community, you know, setting up your own system if you're interested, or kind of how they work. Talking about creating your own events and hosting them. We're talking all about combat because that becomes a big thing you want to manage, and making your own skills and things like that, crafting and loot systems, and creating your own mechanics. So I have a good bit of things planned to kind of help explain and open it up to you So it's good to just dive in, find a community, start working on your writing, because a lot of it's writing, your say, your emotes, your slash say, your slash emotes. Get used to that writing and stuff and find some friends to play with, or maybe start role-playing with a group of friends. Look, it's fun. This hopefully helps demystify some of it. And if you want to take it to the next level, get more into the detail and how these communities are made and managed and run and how you can create your own, I have more videos on that. Just kind of let me know if there's anything interesting, in particular about role-playing, you want to know more about. In this video, I'm going to talk about character creation. There's some timestamps in the description, and let's go ahead and get into what you're here for. There are a few considerations when it comes to creating and building a character. First, the out-of-character and in-character distinction. The way we are communicating right now is known as out-of-character. Well, I'm speaking to you as Gretch, and we both are players. We're players in an MMORPG. When I refer to your character, I'm mainly referring in the context of role-playing as the character that you plan to engage with others within an immersive environment, acting out the things that that character would do, whereas you and I, we are players. Will you make a new character? Many role players, myself included, often role-play on a main character. However, it's also not uncommon to make other characters for role-play as well, so you have different people to play with, different identities, different backgrounds, or even different purposes, themes, and goals. That being said, the other thing we need to keep in mind, as kind of an axiom when it comes to creating characters, is the avatar and roleplay disconnect. We are not the characters we play as when it comes to roleplaying. You and I are players of the game. When it comes to our characters we play as, we need to think and act as they think and they act, and we need to not let our interactions with others bleed into our out-of-character personas. So for example, if someone is a very mean pirate kind of character and acts very mean to your character, that doesn't mean that they're being mean to you out of character, or at least they most certainly shouldn't. It's good to have a healthy disconnect between your character that you play with and you yourself, because that's the way in which you interact with the world. You may find it very limiting if your character is simply a self-insert. Now, many people will use characters for the sake of, self-discovery and identity. However, the problem can be is that can lead to conflict down the road. We may perceive certain things that are attributes of another's character as something insulting to our ego, to our player, ourselves. And we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So always keep in mind a healthy disconnect between the out-of-character and the in-character. The two are separate things and never should they meet. That's referred to as out-of-character bleed. And this should be an aspect of freedom. You can make any kind of character that you can think of, anything you can dream up. You don't have to be that in real life. In fact, I can even talk a bit about occupations and role-playing different occupations in another video. You don't need to be an expert on a topic to role-play an expert, just to kind of give you some perspective. Now that we've talked about considerations, let's talk about the essentials. You're going to need to decide what kind of roleplay you intend to do with this character. And this typically spans between two things, which may be dichotomous, but sometimes they intermix. This is going to span either between social or progressive. For a social character, you're often going to be interacting with others in more open role-playing events. You're typically going to be interacting with people in bars and clubs and taverns and different hosting events that are advertised in shout chats and throughout the different housing and apartment communities. You're going to be interacting with characters through walk-up roleplay. And that's kind of more the mold of the social character. Typically, social characters can already have an established place within the world of the role-playing game that you're playing. Social characters typically can already be established warriors and gladiators and adventurers who've earned more than a few notches on their belts. These are the characters that you enter into a story with others already having experience. In contrast to this are progressive characters. And if you plan to join a progressive role-playing community, one that's focused on adventuring and moving up the ranks and getting stronger over time, making a progression-based character means that you're going to start at the bottom, along with everyone else who joins that role-playing community. Be it a guild and SWTOR, or joining into an adventure-themed guild in World of Warcraft or Free Company in Final Fantasy XIV. Many times you start at 0, the weakest you can possibly be. There's usually a dice system associated, and you're going to start at the lowest roll of the dice that there is because everyone else has already put in the work within that guild. The progression of that guild is actually what makes it very fun, because you eventually grow in the stories that you tell with others. Another difference between social and progression characters is expansion versus growth. Social characters are typically pre-established, as we talked about. Therefore, a lot of their interaction with others is expansion. Expansion on a character that already exists within the world. Whereas when it comes to progression-based roleplay, the characters typically are more about growth. Because they start from the bottom, there's nowhere for them to go but up. Therefore, a lot of times the roleplay that you encounter there is focused on the character's growth. They learn, they develop, they grow, and somewhat expand as well. However, you're going to find that when you make a progression-based character, often they turn out quite different than you expected, and that's part of that character growing up. And then finally, as you're going through this, you need a reason to be here. And again, this is important when it comes to the distinction of social and progression-based characters. For social characters, like I mentioned, they're already established, so you can give them any reason to be there. When it comes to progression-based characters, you need to kind of think of a general starting point. For example, if you're bringing a new character into an adventuring guild, how did they get to that point of joining that guild? Perhaps they encountered a fierce monster that wiped out part of their family and they couldn't combat it. And so they wanted to enlist, with a bunch of adventurers so they could hopefully help others avoid the same tragedy they encountered. Things like that. Just the most basic reason for your character to show up and ready to roleplay. Now comes the fun part of creating your character. Now, if you want, you can actually make a document on a computer, such as Google Docs, or even an Excel spreadsheet to host your character sheet. I personally I use Excel spreadsheet, but you can even use something as simple as a notepad on your phone, just so you can jot down some essentials about your character, keep track of who they are, what kind of person they are, what kind of stuff they have. And if you're in a progressive guild and a heavy role-playing guild, it's going to be very important to keep track of things like your dice, your modifiers, your different skills and proficiencies, things like that, your loot. You want to have a nice place to keep track of all of that. Now, when it comes to character creation itself, the most important question is this: who am I? Who am I? My name is Alan. I'm an explorer that just got in from a trip overseas. I traveled all across the ocean to finally get here to Lenosha, and I'm thinking about opening up a shop. So something as simple as that. Now, the next consideration is going to be your character's race. What race and sub-race are there? Well, depending on the game you're playing, you usually have a good number of selections. In Final Fantasy XIV, you have a good number of races as well as sub-races, and each of them have a little bit of a write-up as far as what the lore is for that sub-race, for both the race and the sub-race itself. To kind of give you an example, this is also a good time to start thinking of a name. Now, ideally, you want to have your character that you name in the game have a lore-friendly name. Thankfully, in Final Fantasy XIV, the name generation feature makes very lore-friendly names for both race and sub-race. Next is going to be your consideration of gender, or perhaps you've already made this consideration upon choosing your race. Gender is something that you don't have to be consistent with out of character. Statistics show that the majority of characters created in MMORPGs typically is female, whereas the majority of players who play MMORPGs typically identify as male. Feel free to make any gender that you want. People typically make the kind of character they enjoy looking at, whether it's humorous, whether it's cool looking, or whether it's attractive to them. It's as simple as that. You want to, at the same time, start going into appearance. Imagine that you're sitting within the quicksands in Ul'dah, and suddenly your character comes walking in through the door. You turn your head and you look over at them, and what is it that you see? Describe what it is, briefly to yourself, what it is you see when you perceive your character walking in through that door. What do they look like? What does their appearance immediately tell you? Do they look rough? Do they smell like they've been outdoors all day? Maybe they smell a bit like the woods, if they're quite a bit of a hunter. Maybe they smell real fragrant. Perhaps they wear a military type uniform of some sorts. Imagine that character comes over and speaks to you directly over at the bar. What does their voice sound like? What kind of dialogue do they use? What about their word choice? They speak with an accent? And what about their mannerisms? How close do they get when they talk to you? Do they scratch their cheek when they get nervous? Do they have a twitch? But it's good to kind of put some of that characteristics into the appearance of that character. After all, the way you interact with others, you want to express and pull that out. That's part of what adds flavor and spice to your characters. And I can talk more about characterization and expression in a future video. But all that is very important when it comes to appearance. I hope this video was helpful. I'll be making more videos on similar subjects such as expressing your character and playing them, writing them, some tips and tricks that I've learned while role-playing, and some unique and creative stuff you can do. All sorts of things like that, because I think there's a lot of fun to be had there. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to actually roleplay your character in the act of doing so. I'm going to be talking about using /say for dialogue, using /emote for your own custom emotes, how to throw dice with the best of them, and if you're new to roleplaying, I have a special challenge for you at the end. But first, everyone needs to learn how to walk before they can run. You've seen it in the cities. You've always seen those role players walking around while everyone else is running. So the first thing you're going to want to do before you do everything else is find out whatever button on your keyboard it is that toggles your walk and run. You'll want to go into the settings menu, the preference menu for whatever game you're playing. Look at the keybinds and look at for whatever button it is that makes you toggle your walk and run. While you're in there, you'll also want to set a keybind for auto movement, for auto moving forward. You probably already have an auto run configuration, and that's a good thing to use in conjunction with your auto walk, because there will be times in role playing where you want to walk and talk with others, and that will free up your hands to be able to use the chat box, have your character walking side by side with somebody and still able to converse. And then while you're in there, you're also going to want to look into a nice keybind for drawing and sheathing your weapon. Find a comfortable place to put that on your keyboard. I usually use Shift X and Shift Z because I typically don't bind skills to those, and I'll use Control a lot for actual skill binds, for playing the game. So something that's convenient and easy for you to use. Anything else you think that would be comfortable for you. When it comes to role-playing, /say is one of the most important things. It's a way in which you express the dialogue and speech of your character. When someone's reading a novel and they start to get a bit bored, where do they start skipping ahead to? They tend to skip ahead to the next point of conversation. Dialogue is so important when it comes to role-playing, and it's so easily overlooked. And yeah, I think that a big part of your focus, especially starting out as a role player, should be in having solid dialogue. Just think of all the short stories you've read that were just two people having a dialogue back and forth. No descriptive text, just dialogue. And how they can tell so much of a story just through the use of their speech alone. You start to recognize people in novels from the way they talk, whether they have an accent, certain word choices, things like that, abbreviations, shortening their words or drawing them out, or intentionally saying things differently, or maybe there's someone who just uses tons of metaphors and expression. Well, /say is the place where you want to do that. Now, /say, you probably use it already if you're brand new to just kind of chat with people around you and mess around. It has a very short proximity in most MMORPGs, so depending on the MMORPG you're playing, you'll want to look at the /say or whatever equivalent that they happen to have there. /say usually is a shorter proximity, just people in close range that you can talk to. When you're actually using dialogue and roleplay, you'll want to surround that dialogue with quotation marks. And that's very helpful to kind of add structure to it and kind of make it stand out so people know specifically that you are actually speaking in character. When it comes to speaking out of character, a quick note on that, you'll want to surround your text with parentheses. That lets whoever's reading it know that you're speaking as a player out of character as opposed to your character themselves. And the other thing with dialogue is that you can combine it with your custom emotes. And of course, as I talked about quotation marks around dialogue, that's a very handy place to add custom text to your custom emotes. Dialogue is so important for expressing a character, their speech, their mannerisms, the way they address people. Do they use formal language? Or do they use really rough language? Are they very vulgar with lots of cursing? Or maybe they have a very lazy way of speaking where they shorten a lot of their words. One of my characters was very nerdy, and so she always tended to typically use technological words and programming kind of terms and stuff like that. And of course, this was in a sci-fi MMORPG, and so it kind of really fit that element. And all our expressions were programmer expressions and things like that. That's your dialogue is so important and critical, and it's just so easily overlooked at the very start. /say is so easily overlooked for newer role players because they tend to go right to the custom emote writing, which is extremely important, and I'll talk about that. But never neglect your /say. Super good, super critical. Now let's talk about custom emotes. Most of your role-playing and interacting with the world and with others is going to be done through custom emotes or your dialogue, and custom emotes is super critical when it comes to expressing your character. Depending on the MMORPG that you're playing, you're going to want to know how their emote system works. I know in Final Fantasy XIV it's /emote or /em. In SWTOR it's /emote or /e or /me even. World of Warcraft works a bit differently. Some MMORPGs don't actually have an emote things, but those are more rare. Those are usually for MMORPGs that typically don't have role players anyways. Elder Scrolls Online, Guild Wars 2, they usually have an emote command or a role-playing channel where you can kind of act out your characters through there. That becomes critical in expressing your character. And I say when you're very new, just focus on brevity and clarity. Clarity so that people easily understand what it is you're writing, and brevity to not burn yourself out. Now, if you want to over time become more elaborate, or maybe you're already proficient in writing, you can go ahead and have some of those longer emotes, and that's completely fine. But if you're just starting out and you're kind of new to it and you're new to writing your own emotes, just keep it brief, keep it concise, and keep it clear. Those custom emotes are ways in which you interact with others and the environment. You know, if you're searching for something, you'd use a custom emote. Walking into a room, you know, after physically walking in and then announcing your presence through an emote so people can kind of see and get a feel for your character, you can do that. Picking up a drink and taking a sip from it, you know, fighting and combat. In the roleplay environment, it's typically not, you know, when role players fight in combat, you're usually not running out and killing mobs or raid bosses. That's what a lot of people think role players do, but most of the time they're not doing that as far as role-playing combat. You're usually typing out your actions on the screen. I can talk a bit more advanced about more dynamic flourishes to add to your roleplay in a future video, but when you're starting out, I say keep everything concise and to the point and direct. It's very common for newer role players to become extremely descriptive, and you don't have to do that. You don't have to become extra wordy to kind of take the next step up in writing, but rather you want to make sure you're focused on the expression of your character. You know, being dynamic, adding a bit of spice and sauciness to the way in which your character interacts with the world. And that usually just comes through very brief writing. It doesn't have to be elaborate to be expressive. It's in the things your character does, how they act, how they treat people, how they stand. When they walk into the room, do they speak loudly? Are they rough? Do they grumble? Do they growl? Do they yell at the top of their lungs? You know, things like that. Your slash emote's going to be super major for expressing your character and interacting. Finally, you're going to want to learn how to roll some dice in case you want to be part of a guild that does that. If not, that's fine. You don't have to worry about it, but dice help introduce a bit of chaos to the formula. It helps bring some balance. You know, for example, if you're fighting with someone else, I know it's very common to say that you emote an attempt to punch somebody in the face. You know, remember that you probably are familiar with the old Nixium video in World of Warcraft, funny stuff. But the idea is that you're not god moding other people. But a lot of times without dice, people tend to become a bit of god moders, or they just become invincible to where they're avoiding everything, and no matter what you do, they manage to have the perfect answer to it. So dice, especially in the structured role-playing format, help provide a bit of equilibrium to where you just throw dice against each other. Even something as simple as a d20, and whoever rolls higher wins, and if you tie, you just re-roll it. Even something as simple as that can be expressed through dice. Super easy way if you want to start dueling people and through role-playing PvP, where you use emotes to battle it out, just roll a d20 to see who gets initiative. Higher roll wins. If you tie, re-roll it. And then for your attacks, you just type your emotes, throw your dice, and the other person throws their dice to see if they can beat or meet your dice. And then if they can't, they get hit. And then it's their turn to attack. And maybe you go for three attacks landing total. Something like that. Well, dice are nice agents of chaos. They take things in directions we don't necessarily expect. It can be a lot of fun. Sometimes when it comes to me making newer characters, I'll often roll a d20 or a d10 to kind of figure out, you know, some of their things that they like or don't like. For example, if they eat new food, I'm usually quietly rolling a d10 to see how much they enjoyed it. Higher number means they love it, lower number means it was worse. Now, things like that. So it helps take some things in directions you may not expect. It's good to understand the dice system of whatever MMORPG it is that you are playing. In Final Fantasy XIV, you have two options. You have slash dice, and then you can put your dice in that you want to roll. For example, slash dice 2d20. We'll roll two 20-sided dice. It also happens to have slash random. Slash dice has to be used in either a party with other players so they can see it there and it's isolated to the party. And it also has slash random that's broadcasted to those standing around. Kind of like slash say is in proximity, your slash random is in proximity in Final Fantasy XIV. So you can do slash random 2d20 to roll your two 20-sided dice. Things like that. Some MMORPGs don't have it. Guild Wars 2 I do not believe has it, and Elder Scrolls does not have it. Many times, if you're in a structured role-playing environment where they want to introduce dice, they'll typically have a dice rolling bot on their Discord. So you typically go, you're playing the game and you have your Discord open, hop over there to roll your dice and then come right back. Something to kind of bridge that gap if the MMORPG doesn't provide it. So thankfully, some of the really popular ones are more prone to include some kind of dice system. So it's good to know, Google around for whatever MMORPG you're playing and see what the dice command is. So, a challenge. If you're new to role-playing, I do have a challenge for you. If you've been following along from the overview to the creation of a character and now through this video, you should have everything you need to start role-playing. You should be able to hop right in with your character, maybe have a character sheet on your phone or whatever. You've worked down a bit of the backstory, even if it's just the bare essentials. And now after this video, you should have everything you need to get right into it. And so if you are new, I have a challenge for you. My challenge is going to be that you interact with two different people. Two different people, or at least, two different groups of people on two different occasions. So it kind of gets your feet wet. Not just one interaction, but two interactions total, if you're new to it. It's as easy as walking up to people and sending them a private message and asking them, hey, do you want to roleplay? And of course, you'll see it. You can recognize the role players in whatever game you're playing. In Final Fantasy XIV, we tend to have RP tags when we're actively engaged in role-playing. You just find someone, send the message, or just walk right up and just jump right in. So go ahead and do that. The reward is making friends. Much more fun to role-play with other people than just by yourself. So if you're brand new, go ahead and work on that. Very easy to make friends in the role-playing community. Lots of great people there. Backstory. In this video, I'm going to be talking about backstory. How it's there to help you. Some ways you can do a little bit of research, and how to use backstory for all it's worth. So we'll be talking about that, and by the end of this video, you'll have everything you need to create a unique backstory for your character to get into role-playing right away. Backstories are very important for giving you ideas and spurring forward on your creativity. It helps push you forward and bringing new ideas. It's a bit of a springboard. So the first thing about backstories is realizing that they're there to help you. You're not there to serve a backstory. The backstory is there to serve you as the author. Now, if you're here, either your curiosity brought you here or maybe you're working on a backstory right now, it's very easy when starting out to be a bit intimidated by some of the amazing backstory that you probably see a lot of role players write. If you're new, it's a bit difficult to kind of comprehend because you look at it and you think to yourself, wow, I wish I could do something like that. I wish I could write such an elaborate backstory. This person has it all together. Well, a couple things about that is first, they didn't start out that way. And two, you eventually, if you want to write a backstory like that, that's eventually something you'll be able to do. And of course, you're playing with that character for years, right? MMORPG roleplay is long form, so you have plenty of opportunities to go revisit that backstory, tweak little things here and there, because it can be rather malleable for you. The backstory's purpose is to provide a reason for where your character is and why they are there. This isn't something that's meant to hold you back. If you think creating a backstory is holding you back and that's a difficult thing to do and you're a bit frustrated with it, that's okay. I think what may help is reframing a bit when it comes to the backstory and realizing that everyone has a place where they've come from, right? Everyone was born somewhere. So if you're looking at the world in which you're going to be role-playing in, what are some of the major cities? If you're playing in Star Wars, you usually have a good selection of planets to choose from. I have a character from Dromund Kaas. I have a character from Mandalore. What's that tell you from someone who's a Mandalorian. If they want to roleplay that kind of character and they come from Mandalore, that's a pretty big deal for them. And what about a Twi'lek that comes from Ryloth? What's that tell you about them, given the history of Twi'lek in Star Wars? Things like that. In Final Fantasy XIV, you have several major cities to come from. Gridania is a great place for hunters. Lenosha is a wonderful place for pirates. And Ul'dah, the Golden City, the Golden Jewel in the Desert, or the Jewel in the Desert, what are those two? It's, of course, known for its very greedy and corrupt mercantile class and whatnot, ruled by the wealthy upper class, but a great place to go if you want to play a more skeevy person, kind of seedy underbelly of the city, or maybe just a really profitable do-good merchant, because sometimes those little philosophical disagreements can spawn some fun role-playing events. Things like that. It can be a lot of fun. When it comes to your backstory, you're going to want to learn how to research a little. And the nice thing is that it actually doesn't take too long to do the research. A common mistake with the new role players is they tend to think that they need to know everything about the lore of the game that they're playing. And that is extremely daunting. I'm going to tell you this, I've been role-playing for years. I don't know most of the lore of the games that I'm playing. I know a good bit. I know enough to get me going. And then, of course, I will admit, when it comes to like Star Wars roleplay, I've looked into more and more lore over time to where I'm quite knowledgeable on a lot of the extended universe in Star Wars. It's good to do some research, and what I would say, my big takeaway for this is don't get lost in the woods. It's super common when you're starting out to try to go into more and more lore research, right? You gotta know everything. You gotta know the right stuff. For example, Draenei in World of Warcraft, they're ancient. They're usually, 2,000 years old or more. And so you need to think of things like, well, where were they in this time? Where were they in that time? If they were 2,000 years old, then what does that mean for all these major historical events that occurred throughout the timeline of the Draenei as well as the Azerothian timeline, right? And how does that affect them? Well, the good news is you don't have to know everything. So don't worry about that. But it's good to research it and kind of know a little about it. One thing I really recommend is, you're here on YouTube right now, right? So go ahead up in the search bar. After you finish watching the video, go ahead up in the search bar and think about the race that you want to play in your MMORPG and just run a search for it. I'm sure you'll find some awesome videos by some really cool people that give you a brief history of the lore or just catch some of the important things. You want to know the basics, for example, how old my character is probably going to be in history, what planet they come from, if they're from another planet, or what city or region they typically come from, and just go for the nice nugget size information just to kind of give you a little detail. The backstory served the purpose of getting you into the spot where you need to be in order to begin role-playing. So let's go into the third subject of this video, is you using your backstory for all it's worth. You don't want to look at backstories as a log of historical events. To me, that can be very dull. A log of historical events for your characters and different dates and times that things happen. If you enjoy that, go ahead and do that, but don't feel that that's what a backstory needs to be. Rather, in thinking about how backstories are there to serve your character, think about where you want your character to be. Think about what goals you want your character to have, and think about, how your character got to where they are today, or perhaps in the occupation where they find themselves. And if you're an open role player, remember, your character can already be established. They can already have a good bit of reputation for having helped several people out, and helped out innocents, or helped out the city, or maybe they've been a merchant for a while and some people recognize them, they're renowned. Maybe they're a famous entertainer that's always there in the goblet, and people go, oh hey, it's her again. Everyone loves the Makoti that comes running by. We see her every weekend. She's great. And those are things that you can put in there because your character can already be experienced and already be renowned, especially in open roleplay. It's not totally dichotomous, but you kind of get the idea. So think about where you want your character to be and what kind of goals you want them to have. So if you're going for an adventure guild, you probably have a character whose goal is to be important, to receive fame, glory, and renown for their great deeds and service to others, and they tend to make a good living from doing things like that. So maybe something happened in their past which brought them into the line of adventuring. Maybe even their parents guilted them into becoming an adventurer because your father was an adventurer, and his mother was an adventurer, and then her parents, they both were heroes in this war. And their characters fought, so this city-state had independence from this other city-state, and that's what's expected of you. So we're going to drop you off on the Adventurers Guild doorsteps on your 18th birthday, and good luck. Things like that. where it kind of gives you a reason to be there and a goal to pursue, right? If you want to make a pop star, for example, for open roleplay, if you want to grow into it more organically, then you want to have some kind of background. Maybe you have a character that played an instrument for years and years. Maybe they always had fans in the hometown where they came from, but after they left home, it became a little bit more difficult for them. The competition was fierce. After all, there's a lot of great bars out there, right? So what does she begin doing? She begins going to different city-states. She starts talking to people, playing her music and gaining a bit of reputation. People start gathering around and listening to her. She's amazing. I can't wait to hear it again. Next thing you know, she's been invited to go over to the amphitheater and start playing her music there. So you have a lot of potential for directions you can take your character, but think of the backstory as something to serve you. Something to serve you and getting you where you need to be to begin role-playing. What kind of character do you want to make? What do you want their goals to be? What kind of personality do you want them to start with, or maybe even grow in? You know, if you want them eventually to grow in a certain type of personality, think about that in regards to your backstory. Start putting those building blocks in, and I would say keep it as brief as possible, especially if you're very new to role-playing. Keep your backstory as brief as possible. That way you're not overwhelming yourself. Do as little research as you need. Do a little research just for the essential. You don't have to know all the lore to get into Final Fantasy role-playing. You really don't have to. And especially with a game like World of Warcraft, the lore is so daunting. You don't have to read all the books to get into World of Warcraft role-playing. There's a lot of books. And some role players are really into that, and they will read them. The thing is, you don't have to. Same with Star Wars. So much lore in the extended universe, so many different games, so many different books and comics. You don't have to know all that just to get into it. Learn what little you need in order to get the ball rolling, and you'll eventually learn the more you're in there. Because when you're in a great role-playing community, if you're in like a guild that does progressive role-play, you're going to be around other hardcore role players, which are great people to talk to bounce ideas off of, to learn things about lore you never knew about. Most of what I ended up learning from Star Wars came from talking to other people in a very big Star Wars guild that was all for role players. There are a lot of people in there who did read the books, a lot of people in there who maybe never read the book, but they were very knowledgeable on it. One person in there was super knowledgeable on role-playing in the Star Wars universe. They knew all the stuff about lore, and admittedly, if you ask them, they actually had never seen a single Star Wars movie, and they never intended to, but they just really loved the lore from the different comic books, what they found online, their YouTube videos, and from different books and novels. Never watched the movies, but they really enjoyed what they had read from online. So just keep that in mind. Don't think that you need to learn everything there is to know about the lore in order to get into it. Don't look at the backstory as daunting. Look at something that serves you. Stay out of the woods. It's so easy to, get lost in the woods, to head down the rabbit hole from one video to the next. It can be very fun if you're there for entertainment, but don't let that distract you from the purpose of your backstory. The purpose of your backstory is to establish why your character is where they are when you begin role-playing. What do they want to do? What are they like? And how did they get there? Those three things, simple as that. Hope you enjoyed the video. There's plenty more to come. There's a playlist right over there if you want to check out some of the other videos I'm making on role-playing. So has this helped you? Have you written backstories before? Let me know in the comments what you think. If you have some tips and tricks of your own for backstories you'd like to share. And I thank you for watching the video. There's plenty more to come. Hey, I'm back with the face cam and everything. Good to see ya. We're going to be talking about adding some creativity to your roleplay. You're probably already doing this. You're probably even ahead of the game. But in this video, I want to talk about some tips that I've used to add a bit of extra tanginess or spiciness to my roleplay. Spiciness is one of those things that adds an extra kick to a salad, or it's that hot sauce that, has that burning sensation in your tongue and the throat that lingers a bit after a good meal. So we're going to be talking about some of that. These are just some tips that have helped me. Maybe they will help you. So what's an example of some spiciness? Well, one is going to be unpredictable actions. Taking an action that others are not expecting. Now, for sake of illustration, I'm going to be referring to a character that I knew back when I was big into Star Wars roleplay. And I was in the Imperial roleplay within the Sith Empire, so keep in mind in these illustrations, this was a character that was evil in an evil empire with other evil characters. So it may not necessarily apply to heroic parties and adventurers that are, have the best intentions in mind. But one character in particular, she was a military leader that was very interesting to interact and engage with. Now, the player themselves was very cool. In fact, you always want to keep that nice in-character, out-of-character distinction. If your character is a jerk, you don't want to be a jerk out of character. But this character was really interesting. She was a military leader, and she was volatile. You did not slip up around her. If you slipped in any kind of military decorum, she would attack you or cut you or hurt you. You'd probably lose a couple of hit points. She could be vicious. She could be sly. She had a razor-sharp tongue, and she was not afraid to take action and attack your character and stuff like that. So, well, what ended up happening is this character and the player likewise gained a reputation, and a good reputation. Like I said, everyone liked the player because the player was pretty cool. But the character was interesting, and what happened is a lot of people would show up to our guild's military events simply to see what this character would do next, because they were unpredictable. They were unhinged. The character was psychotic. The character was vicious, and you never knew what she was going to do or how she react. Even reacting to the simple questions that people would expect someone to have a reasonable response with, this character was always doing something that you did not expect. And that made it very spicy. And I incorporated some of those ideas. Obviously, my character was not a carbon copy of theirs, but my character started, implementing some unique actions of their own that others did not see coming. And likewise, that unpredictability helps people get glued to your character. It helps cultivate immersion, makes it a more immersive environment. It makes it a very interesting one, because these kind of things help forge memories. Forge memories not only for you, but for the others that interact with your character. Now, when I'm talking about this, I do want to give a quick word of caution, is that this is for in-community roleplay. This is not for roleplay in the wild. You don't want to be a disruptive roleplayer when it comes to roleplaying with others that you see in the game that you're playing or on your Discord that you're roleplaying in. You don't want to be a disruptive roleplayer. But within a roleplay community where it's kind of understood, especially if you're hosting your own event, this stuff is far more permissible to get away with. And same thing with the military leader I was using for illustration. She was often the event host when she did all this stuff. And then my character too, if I was hosting it, I could do things that others did not expect. So what's another couple ways that you can add a bit of zestiness to your character in your roleplay? Another way to go about doing this is through your dialogues. Dialogue is so crucially important. I've mentioned in an earlier video. What happens when you're reading a book and you start to get bored? You typically will look at the book and then you'll start skipping ahead the description until you get to the dialogue and the conversation. Dialogue naturally pulls your eyes to it. When you have dialogue going back and forth, you don't need a lot of action, if any at all, because dialogue is just so crucial to expression of roleplay. So what do? Well, you want to focus on dialogue which is punchy and direct. I'm not saying everyone has to type dialogue in the same way. You may have a long-winded character. But in natural conversation on the day-to-day, we tend to understand what each other is talking about without going elaborately in the detail, because we have a certain understanding of context. If I go over to somebody and say, "What's up?" they know exactly what I'm saying. If I ask them if they watched the game the night before, chances are, if we're both familiar with the same sports, they know exactly what I'm talking about and the game I'm referring to. When it comes to dialogue, you want to think about ways in which to express your character, which fits the narrative of the world, as well as gets across the kind of personality your character has. Do they shout? Do they yell? Do they speak with an accent? What kind of accent is it? One character of mine always shortened the words. She didn't have an accent, but she shortened her words. And so it'd be, instead of saying, "I'm going to the store," or I'm going to go pick that up, "I'm going to go pick that up. I'm going to go to the store." You have a whole lot of money instead of a whole lot of money. A whole lot of money, LOTTA, put the apostrophe to show a letter's been dropped, things like that to help express your character. Do they stutter? Do they use certain expressions? Are they a nerdy person? Use lots of techie talk. Think about ways in which your character's personality is displayed through dialogue. And then you want to think about the universe that you're in. You don't want to become meta when it comes to dialogue. Don't reference Pokemon when you're role-playing Star Wars. You want to make sure that the words that you use and your word choice fits that universe. In Star Wars, say you want to use the expression, "Let's talk about the elephant in the room." That expression makes no sense in Star Wars because there's no elephants. But let's talk about the bantha in the room. Oh, suddenly we're in Star Wars. And I'm using an expression that others understand right away. And think about cyberpunk. If you want to get into cyberpunk roleplay and stuff like that, there's a whole bunch of slang that they use that most people are not familiar with in other universes. Think about it. In cyberpunk, they use words like preem and nova. They talked about their buddies. They refer to them as chooms and stuff like that. All firearms referred to as iron. think about the universe that you're in and gear your dialogue to be expressive of that, because you'll realize that your dialogue and the things your character says and how they say them is extremely key for expressing your character and help forging memories with others. And the other way is going to be your writing style. When I started out, and I recommended earlier in my roleplay series, is to focus on concise and brief writing for your actions and whatnot and your emotes. I still strongly recommend that. When I got better, I became more elaborate of a writer. I started writing 3 or 4 paragraphs of actions. And then, as I got even better, I decided to cull all of that and go back down to 1 or 2 paragraphs tops for all my actions. And instead, I focused on the words, the verbs, and the nouns, and the ways in which I used them in dialogue to become more colorful and to be more compact and more meaningful and expressive, in the sense that I didn't have to use more words to get across an idea when I could use less and get across just as well. And think about your choice of verbs and your choice of nouns. Somebody can walk into a room. Anybody can walk into a room. But what if your character trotted into a room? What if your character stomped into a room? What kind of visceral image comes to mind when I talk about that? Think about the difference between a character that trots up to somebody to have a chat versus a character that marches over to somebody to lecture them. Think about your choice of words, your choice of verbs and nouns, and how that comes across as your character. I think you'll find that very helpful for expressing your character in a colorful way outside of the mundane, because what you want to do is push the mundane to the fantastic, because it's fun, and because it helps build immersion, and because it cultivates a very engaging environment, both for you and your interactions with others, and the interactions that others have with your character. It can be a lot of fun. Well, I hope these tips were helpful. If you have any tips of your own, please share them down in the comments below. These are just things that have helped me out. Focusing on unpredictable actions and writing and dialogue, taking things and pushing them to the next level has been super helpful for cultivating all these awesome memories. And of course, like I said, the context is within a roleplay community. You don't want to be disruptive roleplay in the open. So you want to make sure this is in an understood context where all these things can take place. This video serves as an introduction to making role-playing events. We're going to talk about some basic considerations, how to structure your event, and give you some ideas with some common event types. And by the end of the video, you should have all you need to make pretty much any kind of role-playing event, or at least have just the general outline. It's a very modular setup that kind of lets you create any kind of event with it. Well, of course, there's a lot more depth to it than that, but let's go ahead and get into the very basics. So, some basic considerations. The first thing you want to ask is, who is the event for? Is the event for a bunch of social role players? Is it some kind of restaurant themed thing? Is the event for a bunch of adventurers who are out there to go after some people for some adventure, for some treasure, something like that? When is it going to happen? Is it going to happen on a Friday night? Is it going to... Excuse my cat. Is it going to happen on a Friday night during prime time? Because you want to consider the time zone of your guild, when people typically are off work. And then, of course, another big question there along with that is, how long is your event going to last? Now, roleplay events typically last anywhere from 1 to 2 hours. 1 hour is usually for very simple, straightforward events, very commonly repeated events. In a structured role-playing guild, things like these commonly run the lines between academies for training and introducing people to different role-playing styles and different structures within the guild, to crafting events, crafting weapons, crafting equipment, crafting different peripheral things for them to add to the character sheet. They're typically often repeated. You may have some of these similar training events throughout the day. When it comes to the social side of things, you tend to have more straightforward structure. You may have a repeatable format like a nightclub. You usually want to run those 2 hours or more. Sometimes you can leave those more open-ended, or you can kind of conclude them, kick everyone out who's still there, but you kind of can leave it open for people to trickle in and out, right? And then the final thing you want to consider, how are you going to announce your event? How are people going to know about it? At this point in these videos, this is kind of assumed that you're part of a role-playing community. If you're going to be hosting your own events, you likely have a community in which you're going to be hosting them in. So whether it's a guild, a free company, or a fellowship, you have a place of other role players in mind that you're a part of that can attend these kind of events. Well, a lot of times those guilds will have a Discord server set up that complements the guild where the schedule is kept. Those events are then announced on the server before they happen. So usually you have them on a schedule which goes out weekly that people can look up and reference. And then when it comes time to hosting your event, a very common thing is to give an earlier announcement 1 hour out, then 30 minutes out, then 15 minutes out, and then maybe 10 or 5 minutes for your final announcement before you begin. And of course you want to be announcing it in-game as well, not just through the Discord, but letting people in your free company or guild know, hey, the event's going to start in this time. Put an X in the chat. And if I see that X, I'm going to invite you into the group for the guild, for the event, right? The next part is structuring the event. Big question when you're structuring and writing down on a sheet of paper some different things for your event is, where is it going to take place? And it's a great question. Is this a social event that's going to take place in your free company's house? We're going to have something decorated that you can invite people to for the event if you're doing something like that. When it comes to an adventure, you want to think about a couple things. One really good thing to do, and I strongly recommend this if you're brand new, is finding a place in the game world itself, in-game, to bring people together for that event. Now, you could make your own, stronghold, private property stuff, and transform that into a dungeon, into an exploratory area for people to come in and adventure through. You can kind of customize it to look however you want for the most part, and you're also kind of isolated from being out in the open public with a large group of people. Occasionally, some players will come by and harass the role players if they see a bunch of people, grouped up with their weapons out. They're usually pretty young. And by the way, if that happens, completely ignore it. Don't say a single thing to them. They're going to go away and get bored very fast. Don't feed into any of it. But think about where you want to take place. And then what you want to consider is, how will people get there? You're probably not new to role-playing events. If you are in a role-play community, you've probably been to some, so think about how people are going to get there, depending on the game that you're playing. Now, in SWTOR, they have a really nice feature for you for summoning your operations group, which is like your alliance or your raid group, right? Everyone funnels into the raid group before it begins. Well, in SWTOR, they funnel into the operations group, and then you can summon everyone to your location outside in the world itself. And then you have things like private strongholds and private property for guilds. Can you invite people in, or maybe people can easily find a way to get themselves to you? Other times they may have to find you, and you want to think about ways to make it very convenient for people to find you. In some games, you may have to teleport to a certain area, and there may be no way to shuttle someone else to your location. When it comes to structuring the event, what will happen? Does it serve a direct purpose, or is this more of an adventure? If this is an example where, we're going into a dungeon and we're going to go fight a boss and bring back some nice treasure, I'm going to think about, okay, how are we going to get there? What's the story for how we all arrive on scene? If there's a puzzle to solve or a place for them to explore as they're there, they're going to have to make their way through a dangerous network of traps. Finally, we get to some combat, whether it's the inhabitants of, that dungeon we're exploring, or even some other people from the outside competing with us, and maybe finishing off with a nice good fight. Just keep in mind it does take time when it comes to MMO roleplay, and battle in MMO roleplay takes a long time, so anything you can do to make that more convenient and more brief is better, especially if you're starting out. And of course, I'll talk in future videos about how to handle combat. Let's talk about event types just to kind of give you some ideas. I'm going to break it down to social and structured. Now, these two are not dichotomous. It's not a false dichotomy. And the social side of things, you have nightclubs a lot of times where you have a bunch of people just hanging out. Usually someone's managing the bar. Maybe you have entertainment on staff. This can be things from DJ to dancers and whatnot. And you usually want to designate your people that are going to be in those positions if you're in the management position. If you're starting out, you're probably not managing a nightclub unless you're going it alone. But if you're going into a social community of role players and you're just starting out, you're probably not going to be leading that because that's more of a management kind of thing. But just so you know, that's kind of how you want to structure it. Who's going to be working what areas. Get confirmation ahead of time so everyone's on the same page for that. On the structure side of things, you have lots of adventure and story. That's your action, your dynamic combat and stuff like that, your structure, your dungeon crawling. That's your premium content in structured roleplay. On the social side of things, you may have something like a meet and greet so that players can get to know each other. It's also a great thing in structured roleplay. Meet and greet typically is a place for people to come and relax and get to know each other, especially if they're new to the guild or fellowship or free company. Talk about some basic things and getting to roleplay with the character for the first time. Excellent icebreaker, by the way, if they're new to roleplay. On the structure side of things, you typically have in this place being your trainings or academies, depending on what kind of structured role-playing guild that you're running. In Final Fantasy XIV, this may be, for example, training to be an adventurer. You know, we have the Halls of the Novice, right? Well, maybe your free company has a Halls of the Novice, where you kind of introduce players new to your free company to the way that you guys do things in the guild. The combat system, the dice. Maybe everyone has, you know, the set up a character sheet, and this is the event where you kind of introduce what those different things in the character sheet mean. Back in the social side of things, you have one-off things like weddings. Those are actually, you know, pretty simple to set up, right? You have a certain time and date planned for it. So-and-so and thus and such are getting married. So-and-so is going to be the minister. Maybe they say some nice things, bring them together. They're married and you're good to go. It's a one-off event, pretty straightforward. And the structure side of things, obviously not the equivalent, but another example you can use is crafting. A lot of times you may have different items and stuff in the guild which provide different mechanical bonuses or even just color and flavor bonuses. And maybe you have a document set up that people can reference before they attend. And then finally, on the social side of things, you have restaurants. And these are, again, more managerial things to run. You have to usually run your own restaurant or be in the leadership position of, you know, whatever free company you're in to kind of host these things, because you need to have the different people that are the cooks, you have the different servers and stuff like that. Many times you don't have cooks, but if you want to add to it, you have the cooks in the small kitchen, and you have then your servers that are really interacting with the customers and go role play with them. And then on the structure side of things, you have campaigns. Campaigns tend to be your big events, and they typically are adventure stories. Your campaigns are usually a story taking place over time. And even if you're doing a campaign, usually you're in high level leadership of the guild, but the idea is that you have a long-term story that you're telling. Each time you do an event, like maybe a 2-hour story every week or so, you have it set up to where it's kind of a one-off thing. I strongly recommend. You don't want to really do part 3, part 4, part 5, because a lot of times people will see that in the announcements and not want to attend because they weren't there for the earlier ones. Try to make each event that you do of these fully isolated to its own, to where those who have been there before may get something more out of it by recognizing recurrent NPCs or something, but keep it to where it's its own thing, isolated, so that everyone can enjoy it, whether they've been for the previous events in the campaign or they're just coming in. So I hope this was helpful. This is just a very basic introduction into making your own kind of role-playing events. What's out there, maybe give you some ideas. Now this is devoid of a lot of technical stuff, because I do want to make more videos to really get in depth on dungeon mastering for role-playing events. And of course, replace dungeon mastering with whatever your preferred term is. The dungeon master, game host, event host. I want to get into a lot of the detail of handling those kind of events, mechanics, combat, things like that. Let me know in the comments what your preferred method is for building your own events, if you've ever done it before. Crafting your own role-playing adventure. Let's talk about the basic layout. First and foremost, what's the concept of the event that you're trying to create? Now, this video is for adventure-themed role-playing events, more for structured role-play. This tends to be more featured around action and stuff like that, so what's the concept? Is this a dungeon delve? Are you interacting with a storyline that's been ongoing? Things like that. Players typically coming to these events are going to be able to engage with the environment, roleplay, avoid traps or obstacles, and fight some enemies. So, a good question to ask yourself is, what kind of environment will this take place in? Is it going to be in the desert? Is it going to be a snowy climate? Is it going to be in a dungeon deep down into the depths with lots of dangers to delve into? Or maybe it's going to be a spaceship to spaceship battle if you're doing a sci-fi kind of story event. Another good thing to think about in line with this is, what can the players interact with? And ideally, your players are interacting with the environment in some kind of meaningful way, whether it's exploring and searching, opening up doors, looking through dressers and wardrobes and treasure chests, stuff like that, checking computer terminals and trying to hack into them. And another good thing I will say is that NPCs are wonderful for player engagement. A lot of times, a dungeon master that's kind of rather new to the stories will kind of give players a brief idea of something they need to do and then just drop them off and not really describe the environment or things they can interact with. And so it takes like 10 minutes for players to learn how to just walk around normally, because they're kind of wondering what it is they're supposed to be doing. Well, NPCs are wonderful for players' engagement. Players love to interact with your NPCs, so it's good to have, early on an NPC or multiple people to talk to that you kind of point out, so players can go engage with them, or have them just come up and engage the players right away and kind of see how that works for you. Next thing you want to ask yourself in this basic layout is, what are the number of traps? And when I say that, I kind of mean traps and obstacles in general. On one hand, you have like pressure plates, you step on it and releases a switch, an arrow comes whizzing through, things like that. Maybe there's a camera, and the camera's swiveling around, and the players need to be very careful to sneak around in this blind side or use some kind of item or equipment that they may have to, temporarily blind the camera, right? In Metal Gear Solid, it was the chaff grenade. You throw the chaff grenade, and it sends those flecks into the air, which disrupt the electronic signals. Whatever creative thing you can think with that corresponds in the universe you're playing at. And then you have other obstacles, such as, for example, an obstacle course of sorts. Say they have to infiltrate a building. Well, your players may need to carefully sneak around from the outside of the building, search for an opening like a window or something, climb along ledges to get up there, maybe grab a hold of a ladder or put one up themselves, carefully opening the entryway and then lowering a rope so they and their allies can get down, things like that. Another big thing you want to consider in your basic layout is going to be your enemies type and amount. So a good way to balance it, making sure that the challenge of the enemies is scaled to the number of players you currently have for that event. So if you have a massive number of players, maybe you want to think about massive combat where the enemies are more grouped together. Whereas if you have a very small number of players, you may want to keep the number of enemies they deal with kind of around their range. You want to think about things like action economy, which we can talk about later. But then alongside of that, you want to think about the type of enemy you have. So, are the enemies undead? Are the enemies droids? Are they mindless beasts that just are acting off pure primal rage? And that's going to affect what the players are able to do. And your players are naturally going to start thinking of strategies and tactics to engage with. So let's say that you have undead enemies. Your players may immediately know, okay, they're undead, they cannot bleed. Or you may have primal, just raw, maddened beasts, blood-crazed, ferocious monsters. Well, we know that those kind of enemies cannot be mind-controlled. Or maybe they're humanoids, which means they can be intimidated or threatened. So now let's get into the step-by-step. If you've gone through the basic layout, you already have kind of the general concepts of everything together. So now, how do we act it out? Well, as the Dungeon Master, you're going to be actively DMing for your players that are there at the event. You're going to be guiding them through the raid warning chat or the operations leader chat. Whatever game you're playing, you're guiding them and DMing them through the chat in the game. So you want to think about, first and foremost, how you're going to introduce the players to that scene. Once everyone's shown up and the event's starting, you're ready to go. Immediately drop them into the scenario with nice descriptive text. You all stand there in the deep dungeons of whatever we are. And you know that the goal is to get through the end of the dungeons and find the treasure that's said to be in the vaults. Well, this is where you have your 3-act structure. This is a very common thing in dungeon mastering, is splitting your stories into kind of 3 main segments. And it doesn't have to always be this place. It doesn't need to be perfectly balanced. And you often find that things turn out differently than you expect. But I tend to prefer the 3-act structure. The first is roleplay. Now, roleplay is simply the players engaging with each other. And I typically like to introduce this nice and early. So everyone arrives on the scene. This is their opportunity to look around, to explore, engage with the environment, any NPCs, talk to each other, things like that. They're acting in the place of their character. Now, as a dungeon master, what I would do very early on is I would give a brief overview of the area as soon as the event began. You see this, there's that. It smells like this. You can hear in the distance that. And then I would tell people to emote freely and then stack on me when you're ready to continue. And of course, now this is a little thing that I learned as a dungeon master. It's very helpful to have a stealth character in your MMORPG that you're playing as, so you can be an on-screen marker as a DM. So I would move the stealth character up a bit away from the group, and then so the players would emote and talk to each other. And when they were done emoting, or maybe they couldn't think of anything, that's fine. They would all move up towards my stealth character, who was acting as the marker in the world. So your roleplay, and naturally you want to go from there into step 2. And this is a good, juicy part of your event. This is your puzzle section. And your puzzle can take the shape of any kind of, thing, any kind of obstacle that's preventing them from moving forward. Something which requires them to think and to act and to make decisions. And you kind of encourage player autonomy in this, And so a puzzle would be something like a trap. Watching out for an explosive or something like that that's armed and ready to go. There's a door that's there and you need to find out how it opens. There's something in this room. There's all these different things in this room and we need to interact with it somehow in order to get the puzzle door open. It doesn't need to be a literal puzzle, but anything that requires them to interact and think about and explore the way through, you want them to use the resources they have available that they've earned in the guild, such as through skills and items and cool abilities, and their interactions with their other players to kind of engage with your puzzle and make it fun. Sometimes this can be more linear, and I recommend, for the sake of time and when it's early on, making something more linear versus something more open, because open is far more difficult to manage in the time that you're going through it. A good example of something that's more linear is more like you guiding them through obstacle course. You know, there's this area and they see it and they perceive it, and now they need to get through. And usually what I'll have people do is I'll kind of have them go through it at multiple parts. Like, say that there's a camera they have to get through this hallway. Okay, everyone, give me a moat and then roll your dice to try to get through the camera. Let me know how you're doing it, and then roll your dice. And then what I would do is, if someone was being very creative and using an item or something like that, I would reward the emote that they're writing by giving them a bonus to their dice roll. And then, of course, I gave them, if you're familiar with 5e, a DC, or a difficulty check. You're going to need to roll at least a 10 or higher to get through this obstacle. And so what they would do is they'd use their emote and then they roll their dice. So you want to make sure that they're using their emotes, because that's where they start getting creative. And sometimes people would surprise me with such amazing emotes that I would just auto pass them. I would, think sometimes I would be like, that was so good and creative and I'd never thought of that. Consider yourself automatically past that obstacle and on to the next. And then you want to move people through it in groups for the sake of time. You can do one at a time. That's going to take really long when you're talking about MMO roleplay. You can do it in duels as they get through the obstacle, or you can just move them all at once or in parties and groups. I typically group people together. And then you want to get to the third major aspect of your event, which is going to be combat. Now, a common pitfall for a lot of early DMs and DMers and MMO roleplay is to over-focus on combat. I've been to some events where as soon as you step foot in the environment, it's nothing but a constant battle, and that's it. And some of those to me were the most exhausting to be in, because combat can be fun. You want it to be fun. You want combat to consider things like the enemy types and the environment and the tools the players have at their disposal. What makes it unique about this encounter that, the players maybe have never experienced before? Combat can be fun, but you don't want to put them through a combat slog where that's literally all they are doing. It's very common starting out to kind of lean in that direction, because combat gives you a sense of purpose. Everyone knows what they need to do in combat. They need to fight and kill the enemies. Very easy sense of purpose. But what makes it interesting is the different things going on in the environment, interacting with the environment, the enemies. Maybe you have things like weather affecting combat. You have things like multiple enemy types. Maybe the enemies are fighting in groups against groups of players. One enemy is engaging them directly, and another group of enemies is just charging in and flanking them from the side, catching them unaware. Combat can be a lot of fun, and that's where people get to stretch their characters out, especially in structured and adventure roleplay. They have worked on these characters over a long period of time, improved their dice roll number, and gotten more modifiers, gotten cool skills, proficiencies, gears, gadgets, and tools, and now it's time for them to stretch it out and use them. So, you have your combat, and I'll talk specifically about handling combat in future videos. But usually your combat is kind of the capstone of the event that kind of closes it off. It doesn't need to be super long, but combat is a great opportunity for players to get to stretch out their character. So keep an eye on time when you're managing combat in an event, because in MMO roleplay, combat takes a long time. So think about ways to make it go through as quick as possible, because your players are going to be there for a long time. And like I said, if your event is just nothing but a non-stop combat slog, that can be very exhausting. So let's talk about the end of the event. As I mentioned in a previous video, mini short events are 1 hour. Mini story events typically are 2 hours. And that's a good time, especially if you're new, because honestly, it's a lot harder to write a 1 hour adventure than it is a 2 hour adventure. You always want to make sure you stop at a good time. It is far better to stop earlier than it is to stop late. If you have an adventure scheduled with your community of role players, you want to make sure that if you say the event's going to last for 1 hour, it ends at 1 hour. If the event's going to last for 2 hours that you scheduled it, it needs to end at 2 hours. You don't want to go beyond the 2 hour mark. You want to end it at the 2 hours or early, and it's better to default on the side of early than late. Because what's going to happen is a lot of times players may be okay in the moment of having you extend your event out for another hour. Oh yeah, we're having a great time. Keep going. But with the heavily scheduled roleplay events that are in MMO roleplay, you want to, one, respect other host time, 2, respect the time of your players. And 3, keep in mind that while players may be okay with it in the moment, they are going to remember it in the future when it comes to your events. And that may discourage them from coming back, because internally they have in their mind, each time I go to that event, it's scheduled for an hour, but it always turns into an hour and a half or 2. I don't have time for that event. So just keep that in mind. So at the end of the event, what do the players get? And this is something very important as a host. In a structured or hardcore role-playing guild, you typically have some kind of experience system. Once you gain enough experience and you level up in the guild, that's part of your promotion. So you want to make sure the experience is handed out then. And that way you're rewarding them participating in the community, You want to think about loot that you're giving out. And you want to be careful when it comes to loot, and I'll talk about that later as well, because loot is something that can easily make or break a game if you're not used to balancing mechanics. So it feeds into the whole ecosystem of the guild's core mechanical structure, so you want to be very careful when it comes to loot. Focus less on giving very powerful rewards as loot and focusing more on color and flavor and empowering different skill and proficiencies rather than just raw attack and defense bonuses. So that's the end of this video. Plenty more to come as far as dealing with combat and mechanics. Let me know down below in the comments if you have any advice of your own that you've learned for creating your own events. There's a playlist over there. If you'll go ahead and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. I'm going to be making a good bit more, dealing more of the dungeon mastering side of things when it comes to MMO roleplay. In this video, I'm going to talk all about creating your own dice progression system for role-playing in MMOs. I'm going to talk about dice and ranks within your guild, and how to add meaningful progression using skills and loot. And no face cam on this video. My eye's looking a little weird, so enjoy the exciting Guild Wars 2 gameplay in the background, and I'll still have text overlaying it. Progressive role-playing guilds and MMORPGs tend to have a dice system which is considered rather rules-light. So you're probably wondering, what shape should my dice system take? So at its core, this is going to be a custom D20 system. Most everything is going to revolve around the throw of a 20-sided dice. And everyone who joins your guild has to progress themselves up in rank within your role-playing guild. The most important dice I recommend you have players use in your guild, and it will cover everything from attacking to using skills, interacting with the environment, doing a skill check. That dice is going to be a D20. So the system is going to be very simple. When it comes to bidding a number to perform a skill, higher equals better. And you're going to see this simple system is going to let you do a lot. So let's talk about DCs, or difficulty checks. This is a term pulled straight out of D&D. You can set a difficulty check for any number of reasons. A character wants to sneak around an enemy that's on guard. You may want to have that player type an emote and then roll their dice for a stealth check. They're going to roll a D20. So say before they make the attempt, you tell them, you're going to have to beat a 15 or higher because this guard's rather aware. Give me a good emote and then roll your dice, and if you get 15 or higher, I'm going to let you cross to the other side without alerting this very watchful guard. So now we're going to talk about modifiers. What you want to do is add what's known as a modifier to that D20 dice that everyone rolls. And this modifier is going to be tied to the rank within your guild. So say they join your guild, they promote to the next rank, they go from a D20 to a D20 plus 1. The rank they have in the guild corresponds to their dice, so you can call it a rank roll. Everything they do, they keep that rank modifier. If they're doing an attack, D20 plus 2. A stealth check, D20 plus 2, so on and so forth. And this becomes the biggest boon for them to promote within the guild, because promotion of their dice means that they have a permanent bonus to literally everything they do. And you couldn't ask for more. That's the biggest reward you can give to any player in your guild. When it comes to ranks in your guild, as I mentioned earlier, everyone needs to start from the beginning if it's a progressive guild. If you're looking at this system and you're thinking to yourself, Greg, that's not a huge benefit, you're right, but there's two things to consider. The first is that this is the basic dice roll, your basic ranked roll, which keeps everyone around the same power without feeling like lower ranked players are completely useless. And secondly, and more importantly, this core system is meant to be built on by many other features such as skills, attributes, gear, loot, and magic items. With these 5 ranks, you have a basic dice the player can use for everything spread across 5 levels. Think of this whole system that I've explained as the crust of a delicious pizza, right? You're building a pizza. The core dice system forms the crust. You still have to add the sauce, the cheese, and toppings, so we're going to talk about those next. Skills and attributes. This is the sauce and the cheese of your pizza. So first we're going to talk about skills. So skills are abilities that your character can use in combat or throughout the world that does something beyond the basics thing a person typically can do. In RPG, these are the things that cost mana or energy. A skill can be something which inflicts a debuff on an enemy. A skill can be something which hits for twice as much damage. A skill can be a magical spell which can change the environment. Where it gets interesting is that these skills don't necessarily need to have bonuses either. What I recommend is keeping your skills primarily focused on flavor and color and options, with any stats, if necessary, being wholly secondary. Do not be afraid to create skills without any kind of mechanical benefit outside of color and flavor. It's very easy to get lost in the woods trying to balance your game. This will keep you from pulling your hair out when your guild has 100 skills or so. You're trying to juggle and balance all of them and realizing what a monster you created. Skills can be limited based on the rank of the player. A player may have the option to choose a skill. At rank 1, perhaps your players can choose up to 4 skills. And then they're meant to promote pretty fast, right? So at rank 2, that number grows to 8. You get the idea. I'm going to give you 3 examples of general skills. Feel free to use them, change them, take them however you want, steal it. It's yours. First skill example is flight. Flight grants the user the temporary ability to take flight, allowing them to move a certain distance and avoid hazards on the ground, cross gaps and traps, and cross a distance for a short period of time. Fireball, a scorcher of a spell which causes 1 magical damage to an enemy. This skill allows the user to use Fireball as an attack, as well as to start a fire, craft and maneuver fire to a limited extent within an area, warm an environment, or manipulate flames around them. Stealth. When used, the character becomes invisible for 1 turn. When stealth, they can make careful movements around the environment without being detected, unless they are in combat. If they are attempting to sneak past an enemy, or to get an advantage on an enemy through a stealth attack, this player gets a +4 to the roll attempt when they use this skill. These skills give you 3 broad examples for many skills that you can create on your own. So you have flight, that one's based on movement and utility. Fireball is an attack which provides utility, and stealth opens up new combat opportunities, and even more opportunities for roleplay within the environment, whether you're in or out of combat. And you can see from these 3 examples how these skills add to the game, not just through damage skills. So let's say you have a list of 50 skills in your guild, right? You can limit players to a certain number of these based on rank so that they don't get overpowered. And notice the damage skill, Fireball, that I mentioned. It does 1 magical damage. Because the way I do combat and MMO roleplay, every hit is 1 damage. Fireball skill specifies magical damage. If the enemy has a resistance against physical damage or whatever, the skill description itself takes a note that this ability, Fireball, is magical. Therefore, it bypasses any physical resistances. How many skills do you want? Well, it depends on the MMORPG you're playing. For something like Final Fantasy XIV, where everything's kind of a profession or a job, maybe you want to have skills available and open to everything. Think of it like choosing from different professions and jobs. You don't have to break things down in the classes if you don't want to. You don't need to have it where everyone learns everything. You still want to limit it by rank so that people can create a bit of identity through their player skill choices. And it prevents them from being able to do everything. It allows through specialization through choice. So not everyone is super overpowered. You want to limit the number of skills they can all learn. You're allowing them to customize their character by choosing where they want to focus, what skills are important for them to pick up. Gear and loot. Now we come to the final bit of our pizza, the toppings. Gear and loot earned through events in the guild should hold an additional layer of customization and flavor on top of your player's core dice roll. And again, these do not need to take the shape of a big modifier. They can, but I'd say at the most a piece of gear or loot should ever give an attack or defense roll should be a +2. You want to keep it limited, otherwise, like I mentioned earlier, it's going to start replacing any other options the player has. Maybe, say, a really good sword run throughout an event, maybe a championships weapon, an arena roleplay. Say that the sword gives you a +2 attacks using that sword. You don't want to go more than a +2. And you can do things like armor, maybe even tie into an attribute that they need to raise to wear it, such as endurance. Once they have the proper endurance, they can craft the heavy armor, which gives them maximum. And I strongly recommend when it comes to attack and defense, never go beyond a flat +2. Never go beyond that, because that starts to break your system. You get the idea. I have a video on loot which talks about all the different loot options, and it's similar for gear. Limit the amount of bonuses you give the attack and defense, and perhaps consider more horizontal or sideways points progression, such as attributes and things like that. Other skills not necessarily related to combat, having these different options available to them. So, now let's bring it all together. Well, let's take a rank 1 versus a rank 3 player. I'm going to put them in a very similar scenario. So, let's say a rank 1 player wants to make an attack on a basic enemy. What's their basic dice for an attack? Well, a rank 1 player, as we talked about earlier in this video, it's a D20. That is their rank dice for everything so far. Perhaps they've not been in the guild for long, they don't have other skills, attributes, or gear bonuses. Now let's take a look at a rank 3 player. Their base die roll is what? They have a 1d20 +2. And a rank 3 player, they've invested in their skills. They have a skill which allows them to ignore and bypass physical defense once per battle. Furthermore, that rank 3 player has a weapon equipped which gives them a +2. So what happens? The rank 1 player and the rank 3 player both attack the same enemy. Say an enemy which is resilient and an enemy which gets a +4 against physical attacks. They're strong against physical attacks. So, rank 1 player makes their attack roll. They roll their rank dice, that's a 1d20. They roll a 14 total, and the enemy is going to roll their defense. So we're going to do combat like this. The attacker rolls, and then the enemy rolls to meet or beat that dice. So the rank 1 player, they roll a 14 total, and the enemy rolls a 13 plus 4 because of their physical resilience modifier, which gives the enemy a total of 17. So what happened? Well, with a modifier, the enemies plus 4 push them up to a 17, which is beyond what the rank 1 player could produce. So the enemy avoids the attack. Now let's take a look at the rank 3 player in that same situation. The rank 3 player goes up, they ready their weapon, they take a swing. What are they going to roll? What's their core dice for rank 3? 1d20 plus 2. So that rank 3 player, they roll a 14 plus 2, right? Because that's their core dice, and it gives them a total of 16. But also, they have a weapon that they're using that gives them another plus 2, because that's the cap we want to put on loot, right? Well, the enemy rolls for the defense, right? The Dungeon Master rolls for the enemy's defense. The enemy rolls a 13, and they are resilient to damage, so naturally they get a plus 4. However, what if that rank 3 player is using a skill that bypasses physical resilience? Then that enemy's plus 4 to physical defense suddenly disappears. What happens at the end? The rank 1 player misses their attack because the enemy's too resilient. The rank 1 player misses the attack, but the rank 3 player hits. And that's why we want to keep those basic course dice values so low and streamlined. When you start adding things like skills, attributes, bonuses, gear, and loot, you quickly begin beefing up that dice. Now look, why do I go into the detail about this? Because you can have a very simple system. You can have a system where literally everyone in the guild rolls a d20. And maybe all the enemies roll a d20 to meet or beat it. But when it comes to progression, you're going to want people to have a bit more meat. So what do? You start adding more to your game. You're essentially designing a mini desktop game. And this video is helping you how to do that. You're putting together a very rules-light desktop game that people can play, and there's progression, and there's room for progression. Why are the core dice values so low? Because you're going to be adding on to it. Because you want to add more options, more mechanics. You start picking up skills, they start giving you more flavor, more opportunities throughout combat. You want to start picking up attributes. They're going to start expanding the breadth of what your characters can do when they interact in the environment. The different bonuses they accrue over time through progressing in the guild. The gear and loot that they find, which gives them a bonus on their different skills, their different weapons and abilities and whatnot. You quickly begin beefing up that base dice roll. But you have that base dice roll as kind of the go-to dice for everything people do, that d20. And then whatever modifiers on that for the rank 1, the rank 5, you get the point. So you're essentially creating your own miniature tabletop roleplay game system. And through this video, if you do it, take the system, use it, change it however you want, you've created one. You've essentially created one, and now you can begin focusing on adding and putting the little pieces together. It's a modular system. You have your core, you have your skills, your attributes, and then you have your gear and loot, and you start adding things as modifiers in those areas. You can start adding talent systems and talent trees, specializations, stances, different forms, and whatnot, if you want to. You don't have to go that deep into it. Like I said, it's always rules light, but this is a very lightweight system I presented in this video. A very modular one that you can pretty much do anything with. You can run any kind of roleplay game with this. Really, it had a progressive system no matter what kind of guild, whether you're doing sci-fi or medieval, whether you're Final Fantasy XIV, Guild Wars 2, Elder Scrolls Online, World of Warcraft, whatever you're doing. This is essentially an entire player's guide plus Dungeon Master's guide rolled into a single video. So feel free to take the system, modulate it however you wish. It's meant to be modulated and built upon. Have fun with it. That's all for this video. I'll talk more about combat, turns, initiative, and all that good stuff in a future video. I hope this helped provide a very simple system and lay it out for you that you can use to structure your own progressive role-playing guild around. There's a playlist on screen now for my other MMO roleplay videos if you want to check those out. And thanks for watching. Are you ready to punch people in the face? In this video, we're going to focus on 3 basic things: the core of the combat system, initiative, and the order of combat. By the end, you'll have a basic roleplay combat system for any form of combat imaginable, which you can expand upon later. For the sake of illustration, everything in this video will revolve around the use of a flat 20-sided dice. Now, a 20-sided dice offers a nice bit of variety with modifiers, which you can add or subtract to the dice total. And higher is better. 20 sides to the dice means you have a 5% chance to roll a natural 1 or a 5% chance to roll a natural 20. So let's form the most basic skeleton of your role-playing combat system, the D20. Player A and Player B are friends in the role-playing guild who decided they want to role-play some PvP using their guild's dice system. Well, they can roll dice in-game
if the MMORPG they're playing has dice, or the players can roll their dice on a Discord server that they're both members of. Here are 3 simple rules to remember. 1. Everyone rolls a d20. 2. Every player has 4 health points max. 3. Every attack that lands deals 1 health point of damage. So combat will proceed like this. Player A will type out their custom attack emote, then player A will roll their d20 to attack. Then, player B will roll their dice to defend. Player B must now meet or beat the number that player A rolled, or player B will get hit. Both players have 4 health points. Every attack lands does 1 point of damage. You now have a dueling system. So next, let's talk about something I didn't mention in this core system, the initiative. Some of you may be keen to notice I didn't mention initiative. Well, there's a couple ways to handle it. When players enter combat, the first thing everyone needs to do is roll initiative, because that will determine your combat order. And in MMO roleplay, much like tabletop, action is taken through turns. I prefer the base initiative off of a player's basic dice roll in their guild, whatever that may be. The higher their dice roll based on the rank in their guild, the higher their roll for initiative. In D&D 5th edition, the character's dexterity modifier gets added to their d20 for initiative. Some guilds will have everyone roll a flat dice to determine initiative. That works too. However you want to work, that's fine. For this illustration, we're using a d20. So when player A and player B agree to a duel, they roll initiative to see who goes first. Whoever rolls higher, they go first. If they tie, they roll to break the tie. Easy way to resolve it. The order of combat. So, the initiative roll. Player A rolls a 19 for initiative. Player B rolls a 12 for initiative, so who goes first? Player A, clearly. Combat proceeds like this. Player A types the remote, then they roll a d20. Player A rolls a 13. Player B rolls to defend before anything else. Player B rolls a 6. So what happens? They fail to meet or beat it. Well, player B failed to defend against the attack. They lost the roll off, and now they take 1 point of damage. Now player B emotes the results of that damage they took and proceeds with their attack as it's now their turn. Because remember, it's a two-way duel between A and B. And this goes back and forth until one of them reaches 0 hit points, at which point they're knocked unconscious and can no longer fight. That's kind of the idea. They're not dead at 0. That's really hardcore. You typically don't have that, something that extreme in MMO roleplay guilds. But 0 HP typically means they're knocked out, unconscious, or otherwise unable to fight. And you see, with the system, because we established an initiative order, you can actually easily add a third player into this. So let's say player C is watching, and they decide to join the duel and turn it into a free-for-all. So player C enters, and they announce the desire to join the duel, and they roll initiative. Then player C's initiative gets compared to the initiative order of the ongoing duel. They can squeeze in with the initiative order and attack wherever they seem to fit. Once they roll for initiative, and it's good to keep in mind, once a player rolls for initiative to join a fight, that opens them up for attack, because they've declared their intention to join the duel or turn it into a free-for-all. So as you can see, with this system, you can expand upon it. Replace one of the players with enemies which the Dungeon Master controls. You can add more and more players and more enemies into your combat system when you're hosting events by squeezing them into this initiative order. And what happens if people roll the same initiative as another? Well, you can simply resolve it by having, whoever rolled the tie, they roll off against each other to determine which one of them goes before the other. Easy as that. And congrats, now you have your combat system. So what's left? Well, there's quite a bit left to combat, really. There's the intricacies of combat, such as skills, rules to keep in mind, combos, whether you want to use critical hits on a natural 20 or automatic misses on a natural 1. Plus, there's dealing with massive groups of players and how to handle your party, as well as mass combat, since, MMO roleplay tends to have more players. I'll handle that in future videos when I get more in depth. But with this video, you now have a simple, straightforward combat system for any kind of combat within an MMO roleplay environment. There's a playlist on screen now with my other videos on roleplaying. I recommend you watch the one about making your own mini game system for your guild, because it talks about expanding and all these things we talked about. Got some tips for your own? Share them down below, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.
As an MMO Dungeon Master, you'll find that few things are more difficult than actually running combat itself. So there's a couple things I strongly recommend. The first is you always want to have a plan for your battle encounters when you're the DM. And the second is you want to be ready to throw those plans out in a moment's notice. Some people are better at going off the seat of their pants than others when it comes to running combat, and usually that typically comes from years of experience. But when it comes to being an MMO Dungeon Master, it's a bit difficult, One of the things that I always say about 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons is that You have multiple books, you have a good variety of rules and resources to pull from, and few games require you to read books before you can play them nowadays, right? So, it gets easy when you're used to the system, but it's daunting going into it. However, with 5th edition, you have 20 levels worth of balancing. When it comes to running an MMO and, as far as being a dungeon master in an MMO guild, it's a bit different because you don't have 20 levels worth of balancing. You don't have tons of books to help you out. Unless you're strictly running a 5th edition, which is pretty rare in MMO since most people are turned off by that prospect. Most of the time, people are running their own homebrew dice system, whether it's a D20, a D1000. They typically are all homebrew, and so what you want to do is you want to make sure that you plan your battle encounters. If anything, you want to make sure you plan your boss. You want to have a cool boss with a neat narrative that they fit into. Maybe they're the pirate lord that the players have been going after for a while now. And so you want to make sure that you plan it out. And so I recommend typically writing down a few things. Some health, their damage dice roll, and whatever special skills they have. So, for sake of illustration, I brought along my friend known as the Pirate Lord. There he is. There's the Pirate Lord. And so what do we have here? Well, pretty easy. We have HP 10. And so, of course, in my system, and I have a video on, battle systems and everything, everyone deals 1 point of damage if their attack lands. So D20 plus 5, that's their roll for everything, for damage and stuff like that. And then I have their skills. Anyone that attacks in melee has to roll a saving throw, versus frost, or potentially lose their next turn. And I'll talk about that in the issue of balancing in a minute. And then I have another thing, point blank AoE. So if players are grouped together, this Pirate Lord, he can throw some icicles at them and hit both of them at once. And then finally he fights with an axe and frost spell. So I got it all down right here. It's the good old Pirate Lord. I planned for it, right? So what happens? So the time comes that your players are all gathered, and so maybe you say you're playing on 5 people showing up. So 10 health points, right? Sounds good. Everyone has a chance to hit them a couple times, roughly, give or take. Someone's going to miss inevitably. Someone's going to hit extra inevitably. And maybe you thought about action economy, but, that's kind of difficult. So let's say that we go into it one night. We have our good old Pirate Lord. We plan our combat, and it sounds cool. The Pirate Lord, he has an axe, some cool frost spells. He talks with an accent. He's real rough. He's going to be moving around the stage. It sounds cool. We have a mobile enemy. It's colorful. We're in a frosted ice cove. We've just maybe fought through a slew of pirates, and here comes the final encounter. And what starts happening? Well, combat begins, right? Everyone rolls their initiative, and then the players start attacking. Like, okay, this is going to be fun. This is challenging. They'll figure out these mechanics, and they'll start to really like it. So, your party's warrior goes running in with her axe. Just like the pirate has an axe, the warrior has an axe of their own. They take a swing, and they miss because they rolled a 4. But then, you remember the frost enchantment, so you make that warrior roll a frost save, and they have to roll right here a 15 or higher or lose their next turn. So, the warrior begrudgingly rolls their frost save, and they roll a 4 again. They've lost their next turn. We have the mages, and the mages, they begin casting their spells out at the Pirate Lord. But the thing is, they're standing side by side. They haven't moved. So the Pirate Lord, he manages to get some distance, and he sees the mages. He doesn't have to worry about the warrior. He sees the mages, and he casts those ice shards at them. And they all have to beat his roll. And so I roll his dice, which is a D20 plus 5. He rolls a nat 20. And the mages, I think, okay, well, I'm not going to have them auto hit. Maybe I'll give them a chance to defend themselves to some degree. Both mages rolled a 3. They both take 1 point of damage, and they only have 3 hit points total, so they're going to drop pretty fast. The rogue goes slinking through the shadows. He comes up behind the Frost Lord, and he goes for his powerful sneak attack, and he rolls a 2. And then you start seeing this pattern set in as you're, playing through this combat. The players make an attempt, and they fell. The mages aren't quite realizing they have to split up, or maybe they're too focused on getting out a really good spell or trying to help someone else that they're together, and they get blasted down real fast. Your warrior, they go up to the boss, and they keep trying to swing, and every time they keep missing, and they lose their next turn. And then your rogue, he's getting his face beat in over and over by the Pirate Lord's axe, and it's just a mess. And then you start realizing, as this is going through, you're like, Pirate Lord's kicking my guy's ass. Shit. Pirate Lord's going to kill him. So what do? You need to be ready to throw those plans out in a moment's notice, which is part 2 of what I want to get at. As the Dungeon Master, you have full control over that boss. I've kind of seen at times when someone's unleashed an extremely powerful, overpowered boss that has a total party kill inadvertently, and as it starts drawing near that kind of inevitable conclusion, you see the handwriting on the wall, so to speak. The Dungeon Master's like, oh man, well, that was a little bit too difficult than I thought. I didn't expect it to go like this at all. Well, the Dungeon Master's in control of it. So there's a few things you can do to escape. One is, you see this? You can get rid of this. You can toss it out. I tend to be... Hello. I typically keep track of health points on here, and I'll start crossing, down from 10 to 9 to 8, 7, and I'll just start writing that in. However, you can just toss that out. If you think the Pirate Lord's taking enough damage and maybe the party's not going to hang on that much longer, just go ahead and have him die. Or have him get wounded enough that he decides, well, it's time for me to make me exit, and he goes bolting off in the distance. Why? Because survival makes sense to every living creature. Most living creatures are not brave enough to push past their limits for survival if they sense the end of their mortality is near, right? They have that sense that, oh man, I'm about to die. They're typically going to run away, right? And so it's very common for enemies when wounded to run away if you really need them to. And have a plan B. And that's very important too. So say the Pirate Lord starts beating the rear ends. He's taking no damage. There's no good reason for him to leave. The party's rolling terrible. The Pirate Lord, he's rolling 20s and 18. Sometimes you might want to have a plan for, okay, I've knocked him out. Now let's lock him up and throw him in the cages. And then he has some of his servants come over and grab him, his other pirate friends, and grab the party members and throw them in a cage. And now you have a plan for your next event in a week or whenever it is. Have a plan B. Maybe he leaves. Maybe he realizes they're pathetic and he sends other allies after them. Or maybe you just realize that as cool as this is, you don't need to have all this. And maybe you need to retweak it. The D20 plus 5 is pretty good. And, maybe the Pirate Lord's getting really lucky. The players don't need to know these numbers. They don't need to know the stats. They don't need to know the health points. The Pirate Lord needs to have as many health points as you need him to have, whatever situation he's in. You can reduce this to 4 if the fight's gone on long enough and he's only taken 4, bits of damage. Make it very weak and want to retreat or something like that. And then things like balancing, right? So the point blank AoE, that's pretty cool. He's got sweet axe and frost spells. Maybe you want to change that. The melee save versus frost is a pretty cool idea. It makes sense, but losing an entire turn if you fail to save, just a side note, players typically don't like losing turns in your game. It can be very frustrating if they're just sitting there and not playing at the table, so to speak, the MMO virtual table. So maybe not in losing turns, maybe you change that and go, instead of losing a turns at a fail save, they get a -4 on their next roll for an attack. So always plan your encounters. Have something fun. Think of the environment, cool mechanics. People are used to, when it comes to MMO combat, they're used to rolling, typing an attack emote and rolling their dice. And then the enemy rolls to defend it. And then the enemy attacks and the player rolls to defend, back and forth. They're used to that. That's the standard. So when it comes to your bosses and stuff, maybe have a cool Pirate Lord. Come up with some skills of your own. Maybe instead of frost, he uses fire. Maybe certain places of the environment begin to light up with flames, and if the players are not moving out of them carefully and predicting where they're going to be, they could take damage from exploding flames from underground. Things like that. So always have a plan. Always be ready to throw those plans out in a moment's notice. There's the Pirate Lord. Hope it's been helpful. Loot is fun. Loot is rewarding, and loot can also break your game clean over its knee. Continuing on our series of adventure-themed roleplay and MMORPGs, today I'm going to tell you about how I handle loot as an event host for online roleplay, and give you a few ways to how you can handle it, from concept to creation and beyond. Part 1, the loot concept. In an adventure-themed roleplay guild, you typically have a structured game system. You'll use dice. Things won't ever get as complex as something like 5th edition, but you'll have some stuff in place for general levels, ranking up, rolling the dice to attack, a system for learning and using skills, things like that. All of those are fun ways to progress a character. And on top of all those ways sits your loot. Loot is something rewarding, and for many players it becomes a type of trophy that the player gains through their adventures in that role-playing community. Whether it takes the shape of a guild, a free company, whatever MMORPG you're playing, or even in off-site online role-playing communities such as a Discord, all your loot becomes something of a trophy for people to show off and play with. When it comes to being an event host for online role-playing, you want to create loot that is memorable and relevant. So how do you do that? Well, when it comes to creating your own event, first you're going to want to have all of your loot created before you run the actual event. That's going to be step one. Where is the event going to take place within the game world? If you're in an MMORPG, I recommend that you go to that location within the game world and take a look around, whether it's in the open world or some private stronghold you've created, your own dungeon you put together for roleplay. Go there, take a look at a few different things. The environment, whether it's indoors or outdoors, what kind of weather is expected to be around it if it's outdoors, what kind of objects are going to be there in that environment. Computers, terminals, vehicles. Is this a factory full of military equipment? Is this a storefront? A town, an entire town with other NPCs there? Start piecing together some loot from your environment. Then you want to think about your enemies. So your enemies, what kind of gear are they wearing? A soldier may have a uniform, gloves, boots, a utility belt, gadgets. Are they wearing a special vest to hold extra munitions and extra gadgets that they have? What about their weaponry? Are your enemies beasts where players can cut off parts of them for components? Are your enemies droids? You may not want to have players take these droids and use them as their own personal droid, unless you're ready to adopt an additional mechanical layer to your game, but you can have your players still harvesting parts from droids such as optics, sensors, data packs, memory sticks, stuff like that. Take note of all these things for the creation process, which is going to come next. Now, when it comes to designing your loot, you want to think about the mechanical side of things. Now, since this is a series, primarily focused on MMORPGs and role-playing inside MMORPGs, I do want to take a note here that the typical MMORPG form of loot should best be avoided. At least that's what I recommend. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about a linear stat progression on gear, where everything is just a linear upgrade from one to the next. I'm talking about killing a boar and finding a giant broadsword in the beast's stomach alongside a nice pile of gold. That doesn't make any sense. That's just a bit of MMORPG contrivance that's become a mainstay within the genre. As an event host creating your own events, you have every opportunity to create the most flavorful and wonderful loot possible to enrich your game world. The 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide is full of loot and different magical items. And that's a great idea for getting ideas for your own loot. +1 and +2 bonuses there are rare in 5th edition, with many magical items offering additional gameplay options or even opening up new mechanics. And that's a much more valuable loot system than creating linear loot for your guild. So most adventuring role-playing guilds tend to have a dice-light role-playing system. One guild I was in based most things around a D20 system. The problem with linear loot is that very quickly starts to break your game. In one guild, I received as a piece of loot a rifle, which gave me a +4 to my attack roll, and every time an attack landed, I always dealt 1 point of damage. My basic attack roll was a 1d20 +2, and the rifle added +4 to that. So, what happens when you have a piece of gear which is a linear upgrade in every way? The player will only use that item to attack. That's what happens. Why inconvenience yourself with any other weaponry or creative items or tactics when you have a +4 rifle that will give you more benefit than anything else in your kit? You can see the problem that introduces. For this stage of the process, the concept, you want to start taking notes. What kind of loot will your characters be gathering from this area? What kind of mechanics will they affect? And not just ones that are linear, what kind of sideways mechanics can you offer them that make it unique? And finally, you also maybe want to consider what kind of history the place has and how that's reflected in the loot. And when you've made those notes, it's time to go to the creation stage. Part 2, loot creation. This is the fun part. You want to have your Google document over or open a notepad, whatever program you use, because it's time to type up and describe our loot. And I'm going to give you a few free examples you can pull from, use, transform, however you want. So now that you've taken notes on the event that you're planning to host, the environment, enemies, history, and all that, now here's what I do. And I'm going to be assuming I'm creating an event for 4 to 6 players, a small group. And I want to create 10 pieces of loot. So 4 to 6 players, I want to create 10 pieces of loot, so I always have a little more extra. So go ahead and write down the names in your document. If you're starting out, go ahead and write down that document, those names of those 10 pieces of loot. For example, if you're kind of in futuristic or sci-fi, you can have stuff like sneaking boots, cold weather jacket, and a carbine rangefinder. Adapt it to whatever world you're in. So if you're in more of a medieval fantasy, you have leather boots, a woolly coat, and a magic bowstring, something like that. So go ahead and write down the names, and the names only of those 10 pieces of loot that you're characters are going to find at the area of your event. Now the next step is going through and thinking of things mechanically. What I strongly recommend is avoiding things which give a linear increase to attack and defense, and if you do, keep those minimal as possible. Consider a maximum of 3 charges if you do that. You can use the bonus 3 times ever, and then you no longer have the bonus. You can still keep the item, but the bonus is no longer usable. It's spent. So mechanically, what I recommend here is thinking of sideways or horizontal forms of bonuses. Not just linear attack and defense, but horizontal bonuses. Think of bonuses which deal with the feats of strength, skills, and proficiencies. Bonuses to perception, bonuses to acrobatics, bonuses to slicing into terminals. I'm going to give you some examples for those pieces of gear I outlined a little while ago. So on the D20 based system where you want to keep the bonuses, let's do this. So, sneaking boots. When worn, it provides a +2 to sneaking or stealth. Cold weather jacket. When worn, provides a +2 to checks against climate and cold weather, and a +2 to non-combat actions taken in a cold weather environment. Carbine rangefinder. When attached to a carbine, it provides a +2 to a ranged attack, maximum of 3 charges. So we've covered 3 bases here as a general example. A bonus to a skill or talent which has to be used and in effect, a bonus to a specific environment which is not always available, and a flat bonus to combat which is on a maximum of 3 charges total. From there, you're going to want to move on to step 3 of this process. Step 3 is based on what you did back in concepts. Remember when you traveled the environment of your event and took notes? Well, this is where you start adding color to your loot through the text and description. Where was the item found? Who had it? Was it picked from the environment? What does it look like and what characteristics does it have? You'll want to start typing in some flavor text. And why is this important? Because players, even when they're not getting the bonus from the loot anymore, even when all the charges are spent, they will have something valuable that they can play with. Even if they spend all 3 charges of that loot, you'll find that players still enjoy having that piece of loot long after the charges are gone. This is where you inject story, personality, and character into your loot. You want to go through that document, and for each piece of loot, you want to start adding the color, the story through descriptive text. I'm going to provide some examples. So, our sneaking boots, when worn, provides a +2 to sneaking or stealth. And here's our flavor text. Plucked from the feet of a slain Republic soldier, these faux leather boots are of the highest manufacturing quality, and the soles have been swapped and customized with padding which silences the wearer's footsteps. The cold weather jacket. This white jacket with a green trim covers the torso and limbs, with a hood which can be pulled tight around the face. Its shape is roughly marshmallow in design, which provides significant insulation despite its clumsy appearance. The carbine rangefinder. This scope is of unusual make and model, providing a holographic display of the target of whichever laser carbine it is mounted to. Upon mounting, the rangefinder connects to the electronics of the laser rifle and provides a live ammo counter readout through the scope. So what have you done? You've created, with 3 pieces of loot which is valuable even without their mechanical bonuses. You've rewarded your players both mechanically and flavorfully by giving them something which not only complements the gameplay, but also provides them material for role-playing in future events. At this point, if you've created those 10 pieces of loot and fleshed it all out like this, you're ready to distribute the loot at the end of your event. Before I get into talking about distribution, let's talk about additional loot mechanics. And this is getting more advanced. This is where things start to get complex. We've gone from singular pieces of loot which complement a character, and now we're going to talk about adding different layers of mechanics into the games to make them richer and fuller. And here's a few ways we can do that. An easy one that you probably already considered or may possibly be in use in your guild is currency. When it comes to role-playing guilds and communities, you may have a form of in-game currency that players get from attending roleplay events. Obviously, you want this to be separate from what they earn from playing the actual MMORPG itself. The currency must be imaginary and relevant only to the guild, or you run into a lot of problems down the road. Now, currency can be multi-purpose, such as gold, credits, cash, whatever you want. I don't use a general currency in my role-playing guild. I just decide, what general level of income players have depending on their rank. Obviously, in tabletop, you want to get much more specific about currency because there's a lot more you can do with it, and the rules are much more complex. But if you are going to introduce currency to your role-playing guild, I recommend you keep the numbers low. And by low, I mean very low. Perhaps attending an event earns them 1 coin per hour. 2 coins for 2 hours, okay? Maybe they can buy their skills by posting in a channel on your Discord server. Each skill costs 4 coins, something like that. Perhaps certain items are gated behind this currency. Perhaps if you're running a bounty hunter guild, this is how they rank up. You earn 30 coins total, you earn your rank up. And that may seem kind of strange, like what, they bought their way up? Well, these coins are earned, think about it, these coins are earned once per hour for role-playing within the guild. So it encourages participation in the roleplay community, so you get the idea. It's not arbitrary, it's rewarding. Components. Let's talk about components. Crafting can be a huge part of your structured roleplay environment. You may want to have crafting events where people can build their own weapons, gears, tools, and utilities. So that means that you want to have components for them to craft with. Well, one thing you can do, provided you're part of your guild's leadership or at least talking with them about this, is introduce a few different components which are acquired and looted from events. Minerals for materials, herbs for potions, data chips, whatever it may be. You can add these items to your loot table, giving players a few of them depending on the event that you're running. Your guild could have a document set up that's something of a shopping list, which lists all of the components that they need in order to craft certain items, and maybe that stuff can be stored publicly on the server for everyone to see. Now, this does require a lot more guild oversight on loot, so there's a lot more to it, and you can get pretty heavy into the detail of keeping track of all this. But what I'm doing is I'm just offering an additional option if you want to go to that level of depth. Usually, online MMORPG role-playing communities don't go this deep, but it is possible if you want to go that route. It gives players additional goals, and allows them to take charge of their own destiny by choosing their own stuff that they want to craft. Gameplay mechanics. Loot can introduce additional gameplay mechanics, whether broad or narrow in scope. Perhaps a player could actually loot their own personal droid, which they could then turn on, repair and turn on for use in an event. When activated, this droid, at the end of every turn, takes a free attack against one random enemy decided by the event host. Perhaps that droid has a -4 to its attack rolls, so it doesn't go too crazy. Now, that's actually a very powerful benefit to introduce, so depending on your roleplay community, it may not be possible, but maybe it would be. What about a piece of loot which triggers a magical bonus effect on all characters in the party? Perhaps a piece of loot has one-time use only ever, and when used, everyone in the party gets a +4 bonus to every action for 3 turns. That's a way in which mechanics can be played in support of other players. How about a cursed weapon? When drawn, it makes the user go berserk and wild for 5 turns. Perhaps that player can still choose the enemy, or maybe the event host chooses, and that player now gets a -2 to accuracy when they attack. But every attack they hit deals double damage. That opens up a possibility. When it comes to loot, you can delve deeper and deeper into mechanics, and mechanics add layers on top of layers of each other. So, let's talk layers. For example, what happens when someone draws the cursed weapon that makes them go berserk, but they're also benefiting from that magical item that gives them a +4 bonus to everything that they do. And perhaps at the end of their turn, they have a droid that's activated that's going to take an additional shot at the enemy. You can start seeing how these mechanics very quickly can overlap and add more complexity, more flavor, more decisions and possibilities and synergies between the character, their options, and other characters within their party. It's a bit more advanced to think up for newer hosts, but I think you can have a lot of fun layering these things on top of each other. Just be sure to limit your flat attack and defense bonuses by charges so it doesn't become the only option your characters use. I'd be very limited on using those. So part 4, finally, let's talk loot distribution. You've created those 10 pieces of loot, you've given them their mechanical function, added color, now you're ready to host your event. Now there's a couple ways you can distribute at the end of the event. You can assign loot to characters based on their actions throughout the event. For example, that notepad you have next to your computer, you can keep track, so-and-so search this area for an item that they're going to receive at the end of the event. You can do that. The other way you can do it is just have everyone roll on a loot table at the end. And this is what I recommend. Maybe using option 1 occasionally in some instances where it's relevant. But I recommend at the end of your events, having everyone roll a flat d20 to determine loot. You want to have your loot already on a table for you to see, not for your players to see. And you want to assign your loot according to a priority. Higher rolls means better loot. Lower rolls means less loot. And on that note, I want to say, you want to make sure that everyone who attends gets some piece of loot. Just because they roll low, you don't want anyone to go home empty-handed. There's always going to be that one person who rolls exceedingly well throughout all your event, only to drop a nat 1 on the loot roll. Don't screw over that player for being unfortunate enough to roll low when it mattered. If you know what I mean. You don't want to make it so your loot roll is all that mattered in the end. Don't do that. If they rolled a nat 1 or a low roll, give them a piece of loot, but keep it on the lower end of your loot table. Don't screw them over for being unlucky. Just give them a lower ranked piece of loot that you have ready. You're quickly going to see why you want to have more loot than your players. You're going to be looking through their loot rolls and looking for items that are relevant depending on what the player rolled, as well as giving yourself a bit more options on your own table for handing out stuff for whatever things you notice. Maybe everyone starts rolling low on loot. So you want to have more loot than players available so you have more to pick from when the time comes. At the end of the event, when all is said and done, you all disperse, you want to go to your Discord server or wherever you're hosting your communal chat. Discord's kind of the go-to nowadays. And you want to have a channel for posting loot in. Start typing out all the loot there publicly. Have it already typed up, copy-pasted into the server. And you want to start tagging everyone that the loot is assigned to for components, currency, items, gear, everything. Make it public. Tag everyone who receives things. Have it all there public for everyone to see. That's how you can best distribute it. And that's the way I do it, at least. Give everyone loot. I have to say it again. Give everyone loot, even if it's something seemingly unimportant. Even if you have to create something that's purely color, just to give to someone, give them a piece of loot so they have some kind of treasure from your event and a story to tell. I once gave somebody a piece of loot which was essentially a photograph of a broken family looted off the body of a dead soldier killed in battle. No mechanical bonus, just flavor. Stuff like that. Well, that's the end of this video. There's a playlist over there for more MMO role-playing content. Do you have any tips or advice of your own? Post them down in the comments, and feel free to, share these videos with whomever. I'm designing them to be rather topical, so they can be used in reference for people curious in MMO roleplay, adventure and structured roleplay, and for hosting their own events. So, yeah, that's about it. Thanks for watching. Bye.